Chapter 1. The dry, hot wind blew across the land covered by endless yellow sand and rough rocks. The rugged bones that were accidentally exposed under the sand were covered by the sand again after a few breaths. Survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. The law of nature played out incisively and vividly in this barren land. There was often no clear boundary between the predator and the prey here. The circling eagle found its favorite prey. The iconic tail exposed outside the sand dune indicated that a fat rattlesnake was hiding here. The predator in the sky folded its wings and launched its attack from the air as usual. But just as its sharp claws were about to touch the snake body hidden under the sand, the rattlesnake, swaying tail, suddenly released a wave-like sound wave. This sudden counterattack caused the eagle's body to lose its aim instantly, and it plunged directly into the sand dune. Before it could recover and react, the unlucky guy's throat was torn by a claw with ochre scales. Claws. This was not an organ that a rattlesnake could have. A reptile with skin between its claws, a throat full of sharp teeth, and a tail similar to a rattlesnake shook off the sand on its body and slowly walked to its prey. The reptile's neck had two sarcomas, which were special neck folds that had not yet grown ridges. It was a young rattlesnake. This kind of wingless land dragon beast was most used to hunting by relying on its rattlesnake tail and pretending to be the eagle's food to trap and kill it after a successful ambush. It did not immediately start to eat. Instead, it carefully and quickly dragged the prey into the cave that had already been dug. Still in its youth stage, it had to be careful. Even if it fully matured and became a top hunter that could use the dragon language and even master the power of magic, it had to be careful in this area. Because in this desert, there were overlords that were far more powerful than it and its kind. Although those creatures had a trace of blood relationship with the rattlesnake, more often than not, the rattlesnake could only be regarded as a spice in their diet, or some servants with special talents. Patu, with a sound of wind mixed with the dragon language, the rattlesnake that was enjoying its food in the nest immediately turned around and poked its body out of the sand cave. There were not many creatures that could speak the dragon language. In this land, other than a few other dragon subspecies that had a similar position in the food chain, only the real rulers, the real five-colored megalosaurus in the blue dragon's nest could speak the dragon language so fluently, and the only one who knew his name was obviously that existence, Honorable Sir Keys. Seeing who came, the rattlesnake, Patu, quickly pulled itself out of the cave. Its tail seemed to express its inner joy as it swayed and made hissing sounds. Standing in front of him was a member of the true ruling class of the land, Kith Fetten, a young blue dragon who came to collect offerings from his servants between patrols. Without a doubt, the Megalosaurus was the most gifted existence among all dragon-type creatures. Even though he was a young blue dragon, the true dragon size was second only to the red dragon among the pentashade dragons. When he was young, Quest was over 15 feet tall when he was on all fours. Thick neck, powerful forelimbs, sharp claws, symmetrical horns that curved upwards, and deep blue scales. All of these were a sign of the nobility and strength of this species to other dragons. Although it had already grown into a youth, Patu had to accept the fact that it was still slightly smaller than a young blue dragon in terms of size. And this fact was the most important difference between a predator and a prey in nature. Fortunately, Patu would not become food. He was the servant dragon of the young blue dragon in front of him. As long as he contributed his own labor, he would be able to do some labor according to his master's wishes, such as digging a hole in exchange for protection. Yes, protection. Its master was the young blue dragon standing in front of it, our protagonist, Keys Fetten. As a transmigrator, before the author of this book successfully transmigrated him, Zhao Rui was just an ordinary programmer. He did not like smoking, drinking, and even more so, he did not like perming his hair. His biggest hobby was participating in the game Dungeons and Dragons and running groups. Once, during a group gathering after running a group, he got drunk because of drinking. When he woke up, he was faced with the strange reality that he had become a blue dragon fledgling that had just hatched from its egg. There was no doubt that as the second most powerful among the five-colored dragons, the blue dragon was a creature with high intelligence even at the fledgling stage. It was just that the brain of a newborn dragon was still unable to support the thinking ability of an adult. After familiarizing himself with his body, due to more than 20 years of human memory and the knowledge inherited from the dragon bloodline, Keys had a headache. Apart from eating a lot of food every day, he could only sort out and digest the knowledge in his brain through sleep. This was actually the superpower he wanted to have when he was in school. Learning knowledge while lying down was the only thing that could comfort him, since he had just transmigrated. The blue dragon belonged to the lawful faction among the five-colored Megalosaurus. The direct reflection was that the blue dragon was used to relying on its bloodline, and then built a community to live together. They belonged to the Megalosaurus with a certain social attribute. The way of living together made them have some habits that were different from other dragons, especially in the aspect of raising their offspring. Different from the other five-colored dragons, all the newborn eggs of the blue dragon would be gathered together and raised and protected by the whole community, so that the offspring could safely pass through the fragile fledgling and young dragon stage until they reached the youth stage. This also weakened the blue dragon's dependence on its parents in the fledgling stage. More often than not, the blue dragon recognized its bloodline and race, and sometimes the blue dragon community would choose to hatch eggs that did not belong to them. As long as it was not an enemy camp, the fledgling would be influenced by the blue dragon community and join the blue dragon family that hatched and raised them. And our protagonist, Keys Fetton, was found and got the opportunity to be hatched because of this reason. In fact, finding him was also a very coincidental thing. In an era even older than the ancient era, when this land was not yet filled with hot winds and coarse yellow sand, this land was not yet filled with scorching hot winds. Once upon a time, there was a rather brilliant civilization that had built many miraculous undertakings on this land. The history of this civilization was too long ago, and the truth could no longer be verified. Only in the legends of the long-lived race could you catch a glimpse of the remnants of that civilization. And the Megalosaurus happened to be a creature that could live for a long time. And there were many old guys that were more than 10,000 years old among the Megalosaurus. So there were some secrets about this place among the Megalosaurus. Some Megalosaurus said that this civilization was founded by the descendants of the lords of the elemental plane, because the Megalosaurus excavated many broken magic array materials from the ruins of this civilization that could control the elemental jinn. There were also legends that it might be a floating city of the Netheril civilization, the brilliant essence of the arcane civilization. This civilization was a pioneering city ruled by the great arcanists. As for the reason for the demise of this civilization, it was due to the mass fall of the floating cities that destroyed the Netherese civilization. This also explained why this land had become so desolate, and there were still many places with unknown energy radiation to this day. In addition, there were more knowledgeable people who speculated that this was a branch of the ancient Amaska civilization, because there were more mechanical relics here than in other arcane civilizations. It was hard to tell the truth from the various inferences. Megalosaurus lived long enough, so often every Megalosaurus would develop their own hobbies. The blue dragon, which belonged to the pentashade Megalosaurus, except for the natural desire for wealth, did not like to pick fights like the red dragon, nor did it like the green dragon and the black dragon for no reason, and like to frame others or suspect that they were in some kind of conspiracy. It was also not like the white dragon, who lived like a beast and waited for death, as a creature that leaned towards the side of order. The blue dragon often developed a hobby of searching for hidden history through exploration. They were passionate about the process of discovery, and when they finally found the answers, they would be greatly satisfied. Sarota, a legendary megalosaurus with some fame in his race, was the leader of the blue dragon race that occupied this desert called Area. Naturally, he also became a lover of exploring the hidden history of this desert. After he became an adult, he launched dozens of explorations of this land ruled by his race, and in the process of exploring these ruins, he unearthed many benefits. The most direct manifestation of these benefits was that he became a legendary when he was still an old dragon. The gains from exploring and discovering secrets made his strength at least 2 levels higher than his age. With him as the leader, the blue dragon's rule over this land was more stable. There were a total of 15 blue dragons above the age of adulthood, and the same number of young dragons, and fledglings even more. With the low reproductive efficiency of the megalosaurus race, such a scale of population could be said to be thriving. It was precisely because of this that Sarota's undying desire to explore decreased only when she grew from an elder dragon to an elder dragon. On the one hand, basically all the ruins that could be explored had been found, and the most valuable ones had been excavated by him. And the rest of the places were either too dangerous for even a legendary megalosaurus, or not worth much exploring. After all, the blue dragons were not like the scroll dragons who had an extreme curiosity. Their instincts of order made their behavior rather rational. Even if there were secrets that could not bring them benefits, even if they existed, they would only be interested and would not be determined to obtain them. Just before Sarota completed his evolution to an old dragon and went into hibernation for a few years, he carried out his last exploration operation so far. It was this time, buried in a place like an incubator, that he found Keys Fethan, or rather, the dragon egg named Keys Fethan. At the same time, he also found the eggs of some other dragon species and wyverns. But except for the lucky Keys, the other dragon eggs had lost their vitality over the years and turned into fossils. Coincidentally, the dragon egg that was found by the legendary blue dragon belonged to the blue dragon race, so Sarota brought it back to the dragon nest and handed it to the adult blue dragon, who was responsible for incubating and educating the fledglings and young dragons. This had nothing to do with good or evil. It was just out of the blue dragon's natural rationality. Due to the low reproductive efficiency, even the hostile megalosaurus rarely did anything to harm the dragon eggs. Every additional fledgling could bring more strength to the entire population. Chapter 2. After Keys Fethan hatched from the eggshell, he went through 6 years of being a baby dragon. Like other blue dragons of the same age, Keys spent most of his time sleeping and eating. As megalosaurus were born with a bloodline inheritance, they would obtain the corresponding basic knowledge at each age. This process was called knowledge awakening. In the baby dragon stage, as newborn megalosaurus were too young, their thinking and memory abilities were not complete enough. Out of a protective mechanism for their bodies, they would spend most of their time sleeping other than eating. Baby dragons had to sort out the various knowledge that appeared in their brains through sleep. This was the first learning experience for this highly intelligent species. But for Keys Fethan, this process of knowledge awakening was more difficult. Learning was a gradual process of acceptance, understanding, and memory for any creature. It was difficult for learners to master knowledge through force-feeding education. If the educator only knew how to instill knowledge, the greatest possibility was to create a person with a brain full of specious knowledge. Although it was learning knowledge while sleeping, the legacy in the bloodline would not only give every megalosaurus enough sleep to complete digestion and memory, but it would also be passed down in batches according to the different age stages of Megalosaurus. Such a rule was just a normal physiological process for ordinary baby dragons, but for our protagonist Keys, it was a huge test, although in terms of age, he was only a newborn baby dragon. But this process of knowledge awakening determined the amount of inherited knowledge content according to the time after the dragon egg was born, not hatched, under this calculation rule. The knowledge he needed to passively inherit even exceeded that of the oldest legendary Megalosaurus in the blue dragon's lair, Sorota. It was like the content that needed to be taught by the teacher for a semester in school was compressed into one lesson, and such a lesson was taught for more than 6 years. If Keys did not have the ability to summarize and build a database-like memory brought by his background as a programmer, and for unknown reasons he had a more efficient ability to evolve and adjust his body compared to other baby dragons, our protagonist's life as a baby dragon might have ended before it even began. But fortunately, the author would always take care of the protagonist. Keys Fenton survived the passive teaching of improvement class under the state of sleep after eating and successfully passed the baby dragon stage. It was just that his growth at this stage was affected by the excessive amount of knowledge awakening, causing his body to make corresponding adjustments. His head had grown excessively large. Such an evolution, on the one hand, increased the capacity of his brain, thus improving his ability as a carrier of thoughts. On the other hand, his huge mouth allowed him to quickly finish chewing and swallowing when eating, saving him more time to indulge in learning. For a full 6 years and 7 months, this soul from another world gradually became no longer alienated from the baby dragon's body. Our protagonist, Keys Fenton, also accepted the fact that he had become a fantasy creature. The blue dragon, who had completed the inheritance of knowledge and entered the baby dragon stage, would not be as sleepy as the baby dragon. At this stage, the blue dragon would basically master 1 or 2 talent spells according to its own talent. At the same time, it would try to master and gradually become familiar with using its body to hunt and fight. The blue dragon baby dragon would be particularly active at this time, and this situation would continue until it reached the young dragon stage. At this stage, the Megalosaurus was very similar to the mischievous child stage humans, and its destructive power was far greater than that of the mischievous child. At this time, the baby dragon could already crush some large beasts in terms of size, and some well-developed ones would even have a larger size. Furthermore, no matter how ferocious the wild was, it was still difficult to compare with them. The astonishingly large, naughty child dragons would generally have 1 or 2 innate abilities that allowed them to cast spells, coupled with the fact that they were beginning to get used to attacking with their breath. All of these made the baby dragons a troublesome and dangerous predator. Of course, difficult did not mean terrifying, and dangerous did not mean fatal. In fact, at this stage, due to the behavior of the mischievous child, dragons would cause a lot of danger to themselves. Their inexperience and playful nature would cause them to encounter all kinds of dangers when exploring this world. Most of the warriors who had completed the feat of dragon slaying slaughtered these baby dragons who were like hotheads who left the protection of their mother dragons and caused trouble everywhere like mischievous child. At this stage, due to the blue dragon's good family education, the social structure of the dragon nest formed by the community was unified by specific adult blue dragons' education and punishment. This allowed their race to have a higher survival rate of baby dragons compared to other pentashade dragons. Of course, it was not a blind ban. The blue dragon group had ways to let the baby dragons vent their exuberant energy. The battle between the baby dragons was a tradition of the blue dragon race. On one hand, it could train their own fighting skills, and on the other hand, it could establish their future position in the group. There were basically 3 forms of dragon fighting: breath, magic ability, and pure hand-to-hand combat. The blue dragon's breath was lightning breath. An adult blue dragon would be able to spit out a strong and continuous electric current, which could cause fatal damage to the opponent. Generally, the power of the baby dragon's breath was far inferior. In the face of companions who had extremely high resistance to lightning damage, this kind of attack would not be effective. As for the magic ability, the baby blue dragon would generally awaken two to three kinds of magic ability according to the talent. The cloud spell, lightning strike, and water-making spell, sewage spell, were the most awakened abilities. Cloud spell creates a cloud that can confuse the enemy. Lightning strike summons a powerful lightning bolt or a lightning net to cause damage to the enemy. Water-making spell, sewage spell. The blue dragon living in the arid desert can use the water-making spell every day to communicate with the water elemental plane to obtain water equal to its body weight for its own use or pollute lakes and other water sources. There may be other innate spells that could be awakened, but most of them were some more basic abilities. They would only be able to master this powerful and dangerous technique after they had seriously studied and practiced magic in the future. Therefore, when the baby blue dragon fought with each other, most of the time they used hand-to-hand combat to determine the winner. Although there was a specialized adult blue dragon watching over them during the fight, there was no need to worry about casualties, but injuries and bleeding were inevitable. The blue dragon, who belonged to the lawful evil camp, believed that this was a necessary process. Blood and pain would let the baby dragon know how to measure the strong and weak, and know how to obey the order. And in this kind of competition, Keys' talent was unique. The name Keys in the dragon language meant giant head. As the saying went, strength is not lost. In the case of agility and defense, the bigger body of the two parties in hand-to-hand combat would often have more advantages. This was especially true when he had a ferocious giant head, a terrifying mouth that could almost swallow the entire saber-toothed tiger in one bite, making Keys a nightmare for all the baby dragons who wanted to challenge him. Any opponent who fought with him, if they were accidentally bitten by that giant mouth, would only be a minor injury. There were even a few times when the adult megalosaurus who was in charge of supervising the fights had to go down to stop Keys' opponents to prevent them from being bitten and seriously injured. Of course, although they stopped the fights to avoid causing fatal injuries, the blue dragon would not give preferential treatment to the young and weak. According to the values of the blue dragon race, only the strong, good at fighting, and cunning were qualified descendants of the race. Therefore, Keys, who often won battles, would usually receive extra rewards. Although precious gold and jewels, this kind of wealth that the megalosaurus loved the most, the adult members of the same race were reluctant to give it to him. However, the distribution of food, some useful magic equipment, and even more precious materials that recorded spells, including but not limited to magic knowledge, allowed Quessa's strength to grow rapidly every day. It was worth mentioning that with more food distribution, the baby dragon Keys' growth became extremely fast, and he soon got rid of the awkward situation of being a big-headed dragon. This was the intuitive evaluation of Keys by an adult blue dragon, who was in charge of looking after the baby dragon. If it weren't for the fact that the color of your scales is the same, I would have suspected that you have the bloodline of those big, silly red dragons. At this time, this blue dragon, who was once known for his giant head, had already passed the baby dragon stage in his life and become a young dragon. His 4 limbs had become thicker and stronger, and his 2 hind legs could support him to walk upright. His claws and teeth had become sharper and could easily cut through hard granite. His indigo scales were tighter and more resilient, and with every move, the accumulated electric charges in his body would even crackle and explode. These changes were good for the blue dragon. Even the legendary Megalosaurus Sirota, who discovered him, had to admit that this little guy was stronger than himself when he was young. Of course, as a legendary Megalosaurus, Sirota did not think that his position would be threatened by a baby dragon. So he still had great expectations for the changes in Keys, the descendant he brought into the dragon's nest. Perhaps this was the catalyst for him to pick up the exploration of the desert ruins again. However, a young dragon like Keys Fetton, who was too big for his age, was really not suitable to participate in the fight between his peers. His current strength was not inferior to a young blue dragon, and fighting with him was both unfair and too dangerous for other young blue dragons. So Sirota decided to arrange a new way to exhaust the young dragon's vigorous energy. Given that the hundreds of square kilometers of desert near the dragon's nest had been swept by Sirota's tribe several times, there was no longer any danger. So Keys Fetton was put in charge of managing the various subspecies of servant dragons outside the dragon's nest, as well as patrolling the dragon's nest territory set by Sirota. Through this job, Keys could get more opportunities to learn precious magic knowledge as a reward. Chapter 3. The job of patrolling the territory of a dragon's nest was a bit boring and time-consuming for young or adult blue dragons. They preferred jobs that could improve their strength or increase their wealth. For example, plundering cities, or extorting the outermost caravans of passing territories, or responding to the summons of certain existences in exchange for rewards. But for Keys Fetton, this kind of job was the most desirable. It could not only avoid the gaze of the cunning and suspicious elders of the same species, but it could also avoid the various quarrels of the naughty dragons who wanted to challenge it every day. It could also focus on growing. Wasn't it great? So the young blue dragon would happily use the shadow of its dragon wings to measure the land ruled by the dragon's nest every day. The land area of hundreds of square kilometers was not vast for a creature like the Megalosaurus that could fly at high speed, but it was not a small territory either. And although most of the resources and ruins had been explored and excavated by the legendary Megalosaurus Sirota, as long as there was a pair of eyes that were good at discovery, there would still be some small surprises left for the diligent young dragon who was good at exploration. For example, during the first patrol, when he was digging a tunnel to hunt a giant sandworm, Keys found a vein of brilliant copper and dark copper that was extremely beneficial to him. One of the benefits of the awakening of a large amount of inherited knowledge was that it allowed Keys to know some secrets that powerful dragons would only know after reaching the age of an old dragon. For example, during the process of growth, dragons could consciously devour some metal ores to make their bodies stronger. For the blue dragon, a Megalosaurus that was born with the gift of electricity, eating some silver, gold, or copper metals with good conductive properties could not only make their body stronger, but also enhance some of their own magic talents when eaten in large quantities. This was knowledge that ordinary adult Megalosaurus did not know. Megalosaurus teeth were sharp enough to chew metal. Their stomach acid was strong enough to digest most inorganic substances. Their efficient energy utilization system allowed them to survive for a long time, even if they simply ate soil. However, most Megalosaurus would not choose metal ores that were hard to chew as food if there was enough meat to eat. Moreover, metals like gold and silver brought pleasure to the Megalosaurus and were far more valuable than food. However, Keys had the soul of an otherworldly programming ape after all. Although he didn't like things that were beneficial to him, he could force himself to adapt to them with his rational mind. After eating some black copper or in black copper, he clearly felt that his digestive system was working. Even this can be digested and absorbed. It's true that good teeth lead to a good appetite. Everything tastes good. Keys comforted himself as he ate the dirt. The knowledge of science and engineering from his previous life still existed in his memory. He knew that metals were made up of atoms, and the ores he swallowed were all metallic compounds that were rich in copper. His digestion process was to absorb the copper and a small portion of the iron atoms that were useful to the blue dragon, and to enrich them in his bones, teeth, claws, and horns. At the same time, the other components were not excreted and wasted. Instead, they were directly converted into energy through the body's digestive system. This energy could even stimulate the growth and fission of the body's cells. To put it simply, the Megalosaurus was like a digestive machine. It ate a lot and grew quickly, even if it was eating dirt all the time, with enough energy to absorb. The body of this young dragon grew rapidly every day. Swallowing a large amount of metals did not cause heavy metal poisoning. Instead, it allowed him to grow faster than his kind that only ate flesh. Although these sores were not delicious and the digestion process was somewhat uncomfortable. However, it had to be said that the efficiency of the Megalosaurus digestive system to convert matter into energy was abnormal. Keyes even sometimes found that his body seemed to be gradually adapting to the digestion process. This situation did not exist in the inherited knowledge of the dragon species. The young dragon guessed that the reason should be related to some modifications that he might have undergone in the dragon egg before he was born. Still, it was a good change in the end. Keyes quickly adapted to this reality. Every day when he was patrolling, he would take the initiative to dig and search to see if he could find more mineral veins that could be used as his meal. After the first mineral vein was discovered, there were still some mineral veins that were discovered. However, most of them were shallow and poor ores. The overall scale was not large, and most of them had traces of being excavated by the Megalosaurus. This made Keyes speculate that if he knew this way of nourishment as the ruler of the territory, there was no reason that the legendary Megalosaurus Sirota would not know about it. It was possible that at some stage when he was young, he had taken the initiative to search for mineral veins like Lin Huang, eating dirt to nourish himself. However, as he grew older, the benefits brought by this method would eventually reach a certain saturation state without his strange adaptive talent. For a Megalosaurus of that strength, there are probably not many types of edible metals that are useful to them, unless it's adamantium or mithril, eating large amounts of ordinary copper, and iron would at most give their skin some pretty patterns. There's no practical use. Of course, this was for a Megalosaurus like Sirota, the king of the blue dragon population. For Keyes, who was still growing, these additional meals were undoubtedly of great use. As the saying goes, with a mine in hand, there's no need to panic. After finishing the last piece of metal or exposed on the surface of a small mineral vein, the young dragon burped and flew into the sky to continue his daily patrolling work. At this moment, Keyes' body size was significantly larger than a blue dragon of the same age. However, this was not because he was fat, but because he was too strong. After the young dragon spread his wings, the shadow he left behind could cover a herd of a dozen wild camels. If his tail, which was only slightly shorter than his body, was included, his body was close to 60 feet, 20 meters. In fact, if it were not for the blue dragon's iconic dragon horns and indigo scales, his kin in the blue dragons, Lair would even think that he was actually a red dragon nearing adulthood. That's right. After accepting the patrolling work, Keyes, who had just entered the stage of a young dragon for less than 3 years, had already left his peers of the same age in the dust in terms of body size. And for a Megalosaurus, the difference in body size was often the most direct reflection of the difference in strength during the patrolling work. Apart from being able to get sufficient meals, Keyes also had a new harvest, a servant that belonged to him. Any society needs a large number of laborers at the bottom to pay as the cornerstone. The blue dragon population was no exception. The cornerstone of their population was formed by the dragonkin creatures that depended on them for survival. Desert kobold, note 3 great tribes. Tough teeth, sharp claws, strong feet, together with the large number of vipers, they formed the dragon lair dependents appointed by the legendary blue dragon Sirota, who were also the servants of the blue dragon population. The strong win the swift victory. For the dragonkin and vipers who believed in the strong Keyes' extremely intimidating body size, and Sorota's appointment made these dragonkin submit during the patrolling process. Harvesting these dependents was of great help to Keyes' Phaeton. Some of the dragonkin had unique abilities that could help him deal with many things. Rattlesnake Patu was a very good helper. As a viper, the rattlesnake's lifespan was far less long than the Megalosaurus. They aged 5 times faster than the Megalosaurus, so they reached the age of the ancient dragons at 240 years old, and very few could live past 300 years old. Rattlesnakes did not have wings, but skin grew between their claws. Their throats were full of sharp teeth, and they also had a tail like a rattlesnake. Like the blue dragon that lived in the desert, rattlesnakes were also good at digging. They could easily dig a tunnel in the sand, and they could use the magical ability Sand to Stone to turn the fine sand on the walls of the tunnel into sand and stone to reinforce it. Keyes was interested in this ability of the rattlesnakes. Although he had gradually accepted the fact that he had become a blue dragon, he still could not help but think about why he had transmigrated. Keyes believed that the place where the dragon egg was found was the most likely place to find the question that puzzled him. Therefore, the ability of the rattlesnake came in handy. With the help of the rattlesnake, who was as talented as him in digging holes, Keyes believed that he would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort when exploring the ruins of the ancient civilization. And what was even more convenient was that adult rattlesnakes had circle-like neck folds on their necks. They could use their neck folds to open up their neck folds, and when fully opened, they could use their neck folds to reflect some magic damage. Of course, the level of the magic that the rattlesnake could reflect was not high. Some of the low-level magic effects, such as magic boost and magic penetration, were also not effective in defending against. But this was enough. After all, the ancient ruins in the desert were more dangerous and valuable places. The ruler of the dragon nest, Sorota, had explored almost all of them. The remaining places were mostly worthless and relatively less dangerous. Even if they encountered some magic traps, they could use the natural ability of their race to turn the danger into safety. Discover first, and then explore later. For example, a rattlesnake like Patu could first search the area marked by Keyes, and after discovering the exact location of the ruins, it could then be handed over to the young blue dragon for in-depth research. In this way, Keyes could carry out his own secret excavation work in a more efficient way. He only needed to periodically check on the work of these rattlesnakes, as well as check on what they might have obtained in the early stages of the extensive search process. Desert kobold. Kobolds have scaly skin that ranges from dark brown to black. They have 2 light-colored horns on their heads like dogs, shiny eyes, and a rat-like tail. They can speak Draconic, but their voices are like barking dogs. Kobolds and dragons were biologically close relatives. However, there was an important difference between them. Kobolds were cold-blooded creatures, while Megalosaurus were warm-blooded creatures. As a cold-blooded humanoid creature, kobolds were very sensitive to temperature. Kobolds that lived in hot desert areas had greater mobility compared to their counterparts that lived in the wilderness or underground. They were also slightly taller, similar to the height of an adult. Like all kobold tribes, they were used to relying on powerful dragonkin, and through serving the dragonkin, they obtained the right to be their dependents. The number of kobold tribes was limited by the environment and resources, and rarely exceeded 3 digits. Under certain conditions, kobolds with dragon bodies that could grow wings and fly would be born. They could also be called Edord. Ord was the same as wing in Draconic, meaning wing. However, without the protection of the Megalosaurus that the tribe worshipped, kobolds with dragon bodies would usually be killed by their own kind. This behavior was not just out of jealousy, but a deeper reason that stemmed from some conflicts that had been left behind since ancient times. Chapter 4. Patu, what did you find this time? The blue dragon stood on top of the sand dune and stared at the rattlesnake's kin, who was crawling on the ground. Reporting to the Honorable Quess Fenton, Padda stuck out his forked tongue and replied in Draconic with a hissing voice. Your servant dug up a small ruin this time. There were some strange gadgets, but he didn't find any suspicious magic items. I stored some samples in the cave and brought them back. Keys flipped through the relics that the rattlesnake had dragged out from the cave. There were no traces of magic on these items. Most of them were pieces of mechanical parts. Probably because this area is desert, the moisture content in the air is not high, and the dry environment prevented these metal parts from rusting. But Keys used the tip of his claw to fiddle with a few of the items that Padda had taken out. These metals seem to be composed of many kinds of alloys, which is different from the ones found in the past. The discovery of the relic proved that the ancient civilization of this land not only mastered powerful magic, but also seemed to have in-depth research in the field of science and technology, or in the field of metal smelting. As Keys rummaged through the items, there were many small, interesting parts scattered in front of his eyes, but most of them were fragments, and it was difficult to find any valuable traces. Just as he was about to complete the inspection, a cube caught his attention. The blue dragon had a natural elemental affinity with electricity, and the powerful blue dragon could control the charge. Just as Keys's fingertips touched the cube, a flash of electricity was caught by the blue dragon's eyes. This was different from the occasional discharge on the blue dragon's surface. Keys could feel that the transferred charge did not calm down, and the electricity did not disappear, but was stored in the cube. It can store electricity. It seems to be a battery. Keys thought for a moment and used a simple prophecy spell, Detect, to determine what the cube was. But the feedback of the spell was interfered with by the object itself. Excluding the interference of the spell, it meant that the interior of the cube was rich in lead. It's probably a lead-acid battery. It had to be said that magic was wonderful. Although the knowledge inherited from the blue dragon couldn't make Keys a master spellcaster, magic did provide more than one effective tool to solve some problems. Although the divination's detection spell would deviate when faced with a lead plate, there were still many kinds of arcane vision that could be used, such as the true knowing vision. Maybe I should keep some useful arcane vision. This was also the first time Keys tried to use magic to solve a problem. Observing the surface of the cube under the true knowledge vision allowed one to visualize all the physical information in one's brain. At the same time, it also had the effect of X-ray vision. The composition and geometric structure of the cube were clearly displayed in the form of a list in Keys's mind. And when it was displayed, it automatically converted some of the universal weights and measures of this world, length, mass, derby, into Earth units that Keys was more familiar with. Name: Ancient Civilization Energy Module, damaged, form 666 cubic decimeters cube, about 54. 3 kg function, a battery module made using the principle of lead-acid batteries. The internal lead-containing structural metal is soaked in sulfuric acid to generate electric current. The part of the battery surface engraved with yang characters is the positive electrode, and the part engraved with yin characters is the negative electrode. Under normal circumstances, it is suspected to provide energy for small to medium-sized mechanical structures. The discharge is stable and can be used repeatedly. Due to excessive time, the acid leaks and volatilizes, and it has been partially damaged. Looking at these descriptions, Keys felt that he might have found a treasure. There were all kinds of magic in this world, but it was also because of the limitations of knowledge that these creations without magic were easily overlooked by the people who unearthed them. Previously, when Sirota was excavating the ruins, it was very likely that he had overlooked the existence of these technological creations. Where did you find these things? In the area you marked. The cave leading to the ruins still exists, but the exit has been buried by me. Because this ruin is close to the oasis at the edge of the territory, some caravans would occasionally pass by. The rattlesnake sensed that Keyes valued this discovery very much, so it tried to recall the situation of the previous exploration, trying to recall more useful information. After the blue dragon gathered his first batch of kin, the first task he gave was to let these kin of dragons explore some designated desert ruins for him. Most of these key areas that were individually marked were around the area where Sirota found Keyes Fetton's dragon egg. The blue dragon logically deduced that these places he appeared in might hide the reason why he came to this world. After receiving the message from Patu, Keyes recalled the location of this exploration spot. It's about 35 parsangs to the east of the southwest, which is about 47 kilometers. He calculated the distance. There should be some time before the end of this patrol, and before I go back to debrief, so I can do a simple exploration of this ruin. The cubic lead-acid battery was the first technological creation that the Blue Dragon had found in this world that was similar to the one on Earth. He felt that it was necessary for him to rush over and take a look at the situation as soon as possible. Even if he couldn't complete the exploration in one go, he had to find opportunities to find the hidden secrets of this ruin in batches in the future. Moreover, the way the rattlesnake dealt with the end of the passage to the ruin wasn't very clever. Since he had discovered the value of this ruin, Keyes felt that it was necessary to personally conceal this place to avoid any future setbacks. After thinking about this, the Blue Dragon gave the rattlesnake instructions to continue exploring the other marked areas, then jumped up, spread his wings, and flew straight in the direction of the ruin. At the same time, near the ruin discovered by the rattlesnake, a caravan made up of dozens of camel beasts was walking on the scorching sand dunes. Santos Ben Joser, the famous merchant of Nome City and the owner of the Sand Rhino caravan, was sitting in a pavilion on the back of the largest sand rhino in the middle of the caravan. Although the pavilion had a roof made of lizard skin, the hot wind of the desert still brought unbearable heat to the pavilion. Fortunately, this somewhat plump merchant had prepared water bags and washed fruits that he had just replenished with spring water from the oasis to quench his thirst and relieve the deep exhaustion of the long journey. Santos lifted his white headband and let sweat flow down his face. He loosened the rope around his waist with one hand and picked up the water bag with the other. He took a big gulp of spring water from the water bag, not caring that the water droplets wet the linen shirt in front of his chest. The desert at noon was exceptionally hot, even more so for the plump merchant with a huge belly. By the blazing sun above, the damned Selimians and Samaritans are actually waging war in the month of Opani, the second month of summer. May fire and sand curse these two barbarian scum tribes wandering outside Nome City. The targets of his curse, Salem and Samhain, were two giant desert nomadic elven tribes with more than 10,000 string control warriors near Nome City. Although this land was nominally under the jurisdiction of Nome City's consul under Pharaoh Medici, the consul of Nome City clearly lacked the ability to effectively restrain nomads who came and went like the wind and had no fixed abode. Most of Nome's army were infantry garrisons made up of shield-wielding swordsmen. They lacked the mobility of cavalry. This way, if the army wanted to deal with these petty problems of the empire, they would have to use the power of spellcasters. However, to subdue such a large tribe, they would at least need the participation of multiple spellcasters. They might even need a legendary-level spellmaster as a last resort. In this world covered by the desert, there seemed to be many sources of magic, but even magic could not go against the first law of thermodynamics. Other than the natural spellcasting races with spell-like abilities and some who could communicate with the mysterious source of the multiverse to mobilize the power of magic. As for the weave, this world did not have any gods in the field of magic. In fact, this world's faith was the same as its natural environment. This was a desert of faith. Naturally, there was no weave that was specially created by the gods in charge of magic, which was commonly seen in other worlds. Most of the human spellcasters in this world had mastered the ability to extract the life force or soul energy of creatures in the surrounding environment to convert into magic. It was said that this method of casting came from another main material plane, Adas, too, which was also made up of deserts. This method of casting obviously had a lot of restrictions in the desert. In the vast desert, there were very few areas where vegetation or species could sustain high-level magic. This required the spellcaster to carry the obsidian orbs filled with the souls of slaves in advance to extract energy or directly extract their own life force to cast the spell. Although there was a solution, each spell was equivalent to a life or even more lives of slaves. Such a price could not be said to be cheap. Some non-evil spellcasters would even choose to undergo periodic psychological treatment after using this method of casting spells. Moreover, the source of this method of casting, those spellcasters who were at least legendary level and had begun to develop an interest in exploring the multiverse and had interacted with the world of Adas, would definitely understand the tragedy caused by the abuse of this method of casting, the collapse of the ecosystem, and the extinction of species. Therefore, spellcasters who used this method of casting would first learn to restrain themselves. They would do their best to control their spellcasting behavior outside of research. Unless they were forced to fight, spellcasters would do their best to avoid all conflict. After all, no one in their right mind would be willing to see the world they lived in walk towards destruction. Therefore, the powerful spellcasters in Gnome City only had a strong deterrent force on the surface. The consul still lacked the ability to mediate and intervene in the conflicts between tribes outside the city. In most cases, such conflicts between tribes would be allowed to happen if they did not escalate. Blazing sun and blazing wind will always stop the fighting between tribes. It will not cause too much loss to Gnome's interests. This was Consul Gnome's final verdict on the conflict between the two tribes. However, unlike the consul's optimistic prediction and the ignorant and mocking tone of the city's citizens, Gnome's caravans actually hated the conflict between tribes. This had nothing to do with morality or kindness. It was related to their own interests. Usually, you can pass through the trade routes safely as long as you pay a certain toll to the tribe. Now, when you meet the tribe's patrols, you will be asked for all your goods and even be robbed and slaughtered. These damn tribesmen, who are so poor that they can't even gather a set of armor, become extremely greedy when it comes to war. Santos Ben Joser thought, helplessly as he leaned out of the pavilion and looked at the caravan moving under the blazing sun. Originally, the caravans in the desert would travel at night and rest during the day to save water and avoid the sun. However, now that the trade route had been changed to avoid the tribal war, the merchants had no choice but to choose to travel through dangerous areas that they would not normally pass through. In these areas where they could not buy detailed maps, even if they spent a lot of money, it was very easy to get lost if they still traveled at night. Getting lost in the desert and encountering sandstorms were the two most dangerous situations. In order to avoid getting lost and to make it in time to deliver the goods, the Sand Rhino caravan could only travel during the day when it was easy to tell the direction, enduring the heat as they traveled. Traveling in such heat, we'll lose another batch of slaves. When we reach Nome, we'll have to spend money to buy more. Damn tribal war. May fire and sand curse you all. Dividing line 1. Tip discharge is a discharge phenomenon that occurs at the sharp part of an object under the effect of a strong electric field. It is a type of corona discharge. The electric charge at the tip of a conductor is especially dense, and the electric field near the tip is especially strong, resulting in tip discharge. 2. An arid world, Athos. Athos was originally a rich blue ocean planet, but magic that went out of control took away its life force, turning it into a scorching sun, a land abandoned by the gods and lacking water, and Hope cataclysmic setting sun world. Psychic powers were highly developed in Athos, and even animals had them. Every individual was born with one or two wild talents. However, compared to psychic powers, the spellcasting method of Athos, which was discovered by a Perinthian, the villain boss, was more well known in all planes. Unlike most worlds, the magic power they used was obtained by absorbing the life force around them. This allowed them to quickly obtain large amounts of magic power, but excessive use turned the entire planet into a barren landscape. Chapter 5. I have been lying in the sand for a long time, silent, forgetting the seasons. Gibran, sand and foam know. One wanted to hide in the sand when the sun was high in the sky, unless they had a layer of skin without sweat glands that was tough enough to resist the high temperature, dehydration, and coarse sand, and a pair of eyes like a crocodile that had 2 layers of eyelids and an instantaneous membrane to protect them. Of course, this was not a body structure that humans could have, but the lizardmen raiders in the desert could. They were competent for this kind of ambush mission, hidden in the sand, just as Santos's sand rhino caravan carefully avoided several suspected quicksand areas and walked into the lizardmen raiders' ambush from the shady side of the towering sand dune. The attack swept over like a sandstorm. The lizardmen, who had been lying in ambush in the hot sand for 3 or 4 hourglasses, rushed out of the sand like fish thrown into a pot of oil. They held sickles made of steel in their hands and threw flying axes made of obsidian. For a moment, the enemy rushed to the sand rhino caravan from all directions. Don't panic. Take care of your camel beasts. Warriors, block these short reptilians for me. The rest of you form a circle. Pick up your weapons and prepare to fight for your own lives. Santos saw the attack and pulled out his scimitar from under the cushion with an agility that did not match his fat body at all. At the same time, he activated the ring that he bought with a lot of money, which was enchanted with the spell stone protection. As the leader of a caravan that had successfully traveled through the desert for many years, he was certainly not a fragile lamb waiting to be slaughtered. When faced with the attack, he made the right judgment in the first place. The throwing axes of the lizardmen raiders only managed to injure a few unlucky warriors and some bite slaves who were carrying heavy supplies in the crowd to take care of the camel beasts. At most, they only managed to kill the horses of the warriors on the periphery of the caravan. However, these warriors had already leaped off their horses before their mounts fell to the ground. They skillfully blocked the flying axes with their shields and deflected them with their machetes. An agile and powerful warrior even used his machete to send the spinning flying axes back to the lizardmen who threw the axes. The flying axes directly hit a lizardman who threw the axes. Well done! The warriors cheered loudly. Most of the warriors in the caravan were skilled in archery and horse riding. After the lizardmen threw the first round of axes, there were warriors who took out their bows and arrows to counterattack. There were also bold warriors who controlled their desert horses to circle around the lizardmen's flanks and behind them. While running around, they used the Mangudi method, which was to use the advantage of speed to twist their waist and shoot at the enemy behind them to harass them. Faced with the resistance of the mercenaries, some of the lizardman raiders chose to burrow back into the sand and dig their way forward quickly. Some of them chose to endure the rain of arrows because the sand beneath their feet was too hard for them to dig. They threw their remaining axes into the enemy's formation. Lizardmen had tough skin and scales to protect them. They also used some of the broken armor they had plundered to arm their hearts, heads, and relatively weak joints. Unless they used crossbows, ordinary bows were of little threat to them. From the beginning of the attack to the close combat between the mercenaries and the mercenaries, it only took a dozen breaths of time. The scythes of the lizardmen raiders clashed with the shields and scimitars of the mercenaries. A single lizardman was not as tall as a human warrior, and they were also weaker. However, the lizard men of the desert were better at cooperating with each other. They were good at fighting in small groups of 2 or 3. They would form small groups to attack their opponents. Lizard men that were born from eggs would form allies with their peers from the same nest. Together, they would familiarize themselves with this hunting and fighting style. Therefore, although the caravan had more guards and the warriors themselves were stronger, the lizard men were able to use their advantage of agility and small-scale cooperation to offset this disadvantage. Their scythes tore through the air and reaped a life from time to time. However, this wouldn't change the outcome of the battle. With more than 30 experienced warriors as guards against these lizardmen raiders, they would definitely emerge victorious. Santos looked at the caravan warriors and the lizardmen raiders who were locked in a fierce battle and suddenly frowned. Something is wrong? There seems to be a problem somewhere. This road was temporarily changed because of the war between the Salem and Sawin tribes. This place is too close to the territory of the Megalosaurus. Generally, no caravan would take the risk to take this route. Even if these lizard men knew about the war between the tribes and ambushed the caravan here, but there was something wrong with the number of people. The number of lizardmen raiders was too small. The veteran desert merchant immediately reacted. According to his experience, these lizardmen raiders liked to take advantage of the number of people when they raided caravans. In order to be safe, they would only attack when there were twice the number of people in the caravan. Moreover, the weapons that the lizardmen raiders wielded were all made of steel, not cheap obsidian. This was something that only a large raider tribe could afford. A large tribe would not only attack with a dozen or so raiders, so the remaining lizardmen raiders could only be careful of the ground. The caravan owner who discovered the problem only had time to shout out his judgment. The second round of attack appeared before Santos finished shouting. Twice the number of lizardmen raiders in the first round broke out of the sand in the middle of the caravan's circle. Unlike the first round of attack, which used throwing axes to open the way, the lizardmen raiders who attacked the caravan this time took out several small leather bags from their waists and sprinkled green powder. For a moment, the entire circle was filled with smoke made of green powder. Everyone hold your breath. Free attack. Rush out. The sand rhino that Santos was riding was the largest camel in the caravan. He was not covered by the poisonous fog in the pavilion, so he had time to shout out a warning. But the others were not so lucky. Even the rider of the sand rhino was not spared. He accidentally inhaled a mouthful of thick green smoke. The rider covered his neck with his hand, and the great pain made him fall off the sand rhino. He could only writhe on the ground in pain. He inhaled some more poisonous fog, and in the end, he foamed at the mouth. His face was pale, and his eyes were bulging. He made a strange posture and died at the feet of the sand rhino. Most of the others who were shrouded in the poisonous fog died the same way if they did not hold their breath. After inhaling the poisonous fog, the camel beasts, including the sand rhino, could hold on longer than humans because of their strong physique. But after a while, they also died. The giant sand rhino, faced with the threat of death, frantically ran out of the area covered by the thick green poisonous fog. Driven by the will to survive, it ran in a random direction in the desert in a panic for dozens of breaths. But because it inhaled a large amount of poisonous fog, the giant beast's 4 thick legs could not support its body. It twitched and fell to the ground. Santos, who was riding the sand rhino, looked back in the direction of the caravan with fear and heartache. Damn it, these people must be coming for me. They probably know that I have the formula. Those green-skinned bastards. Because of their race, lizardmen raiders were immune to most poisons. They were also used to smearing poison on their weapons to increase their lethality. But when raiding caravans, they rarely used such a wide range of poisonous fog to attack. Such an attack would cause the caravan's precious camel beasts to die, reducing their harvest by a lot. In this attack against the sand rhino caravan, after the camel beasts died, it would be difficult for them to take away the remaining goods. The lizardmen, raiders, also did not have that many camel beasts to prepare. If it was really an ordinary ambush, they would have paid the casualties of the first wave in exchange for a pile of goods that could not be taken away. This attack was simply a huge loss. Unless the lizardmen raiders were not interested in the high-quality papyrus and silk fabrics that the caravan was transporting on the surface, but other goods that were more valuable and easier to take away. Chapter 6. The lizardmen raiders were known for their ferocity in the desert. They would chase after their enemies like hyenas until their blades tore through the bodies of their prey and drank their blood. Normal humans would not be able to escape the pursuit of these creatures in the desert. Even if they were on horseback, they would not be able to outrun the lizardmen raiders unless they had some extra help. Grease trap. Haste. As a successful desert merchant, Santos Ben Jozer's wealth was said to be enough to buy half of the shops in Nome City's Grand Bazaar. The rumor may have been exaggerated, but the head of the merchant group was indeed rich. That was why he had a few precious enchanted equipment to protect himself. Other than the stone of protection ring he used in battle, he also used an escape spell on his boots when the lizardmen chased after him. The grease trap allowed him to set up a trap with grease summoned by magic while he was escaping. When the enemies stepped on the trap while running, they would lose their balance and fall to the ground, blocking the enemy's path. The haste allowed Santos to run as fast as a galloping horse for about an hourglass. With the help of the enchanted equipment, Santos ran quickly on the sand ridges where it was not easy to set up an ambush. Even with the help of magic, he would still fall and roll like a ball from time to time. Santos had no time to think about his pathetic appearance. He knew that the effect of magic was limited by time. He was not a spellcaster, so he could not remember spells, nor could he use the obsidian magic orbs to recharge his enchanted equipment. If he could not get rid of the lizardmen in an hourglass time, he would lose his life. Those damned reptilians must be after that batch of skuma. They might know more. Santos tightened his grip on the scroll that was tied around his waist. Even when he was running for his life, he was still concerned about its safety, as if it was his life. If it wasn't for the need to deliver the enchantment formula to Nome on time, the caravan wouldn't have to be in such a hurry, and we wouldn't have fallen into the ambush of the green dwarfs. In fact, the value of the papyrus and silk products that the sand rhino caravan was transporting could only cover the losses from the risk of taking a detour. The real profit came from a forbidden item called skuma, which cost 30 silver cats for a small bottle. A strong slave with Bite's insignia only cost 5 silver cats. This skuma potion was spread from the most chaotic city in the desert, Copt. Legend had it that it was an alchemical potion invented by a powerful lich. This potion was once presented to the pharaoh as a hobby tribute, but the Grand Vader, Prime Minister, saw through the plot. Skuma potion could stimulate a person's energy, allowing them to gain a temporary boost in energy. It was a little helpful in casting spells and fighting, and it could also relieve the pain of physical injuries. However, the side effect was that it was extremely addictive. At the same time, long-term consumption of this potion would gradually destroy the body of the user. The enraged Grand Vader personally led the spellcasters to find the lich hiding in Copt. He extinguished the lich's soul fire and broke the lich's hidden phylactery, soaking it in a cesspool as a warning to the world. As a contraband, skuma potion was strictly prohibited from being manufactured, transported, or consumed by the Medici. However, capital was afraid of no profit or too little profit, just like nature was afraid of a vacuum. For a profit of 50%, it would take risks. For a profit of 100%, it would trample all human laws. For a profit of 300%, it would dare to commit any crime. Therefore, since the day skooma was born, there were merchants who were willing to violate the laws of the empire for this depraved commodity. Of course, this was only the case in private. If it wasn't for the sandstorm that buried a batch of expensive spices from Gnome's family and forced me to pay so much compensation and fine, I wouldn't have fallen to the point where I have to come into contact with those criminals and earn this damned blood money. Damn the sandstorm, damn the Gnome family. By the blazing sun, I curse you all. Although a few weeks had passed, Santos still could not forget the scene when he came into contact with the supply of skooma from the exiled city of criminals in Copt. Dark, crypt-like houses protruded like tombs all over the city. From the outside, it looked like a city of tombs that stretched out endlessly. The city of Copt was said to be the paradise of the ancient halflings, but later, due to desertification, the halflings migrated away from the clean and tidy cave-like houses, leaving only the remnants of the cave-like buildings. Over the years, it became a terrible city that resembled a graveyard. Later, the Medici Empire exiled the criminals to the city and left them to fend for themselves. For hundreds of years, the city, which was full of sin, became the most chaotic source of evil in the entire empire. However, the city was also unusually prosperous, and all kinds of evil transactions could be found here. Evil creatures like warlocks, blasphemous warriors, trolls, and even ghouls and liches could find hiding places in Copt. This city was the only one without a consul or city guards. Every year, one of the most terrifying tornadoes in the desert would sweep through this city. Other than the small and cramped cave houses left behind by the ancient halflings, no other city building could be left unscathed. Every year, Santos Ben Joser would bring a caravan to this abnormal and prosperous city, but only in some of the outer bazaars to complete the delivery of goods. This time, in order to get the supply of skooma, he had to rely on the recommendation of a foreign merchant who always traded with him. Only then did he come into contact with the underground chamber of commerce that sold skooma. He traded 100 bottles of skooma and an enchanted scroll that could purify skooma into another new type of corruption potion, moon candy. The foreign merchant was a lizard man. Curse these disgusting and treacherous green-skinned reptiles. May the eggshells of your descendants shatter. May your tribes be attacked by thousands of races. May your drinking water dry up. The merchant may have been a good warrior when he was young, but he was not a spellcaster. So his curses could not hurt the enemy. Cursing in his heart and mouth could not change the gradual decline of his physical strength. He was drenched in sweat from head to toe, and his steps gradually slowed down. The lizardmen raiders chasing after him were in a much better state. At the very least, their stamina was much better than the fat merchant leaders. In the desert, these nomads chased Santos for nearly an hourglass under the scorching sun, but they were not shaken off. After the enchanted boots' magic effect disappeared, the distance between the two gradually narrowed. Damn it, I have to think of a way. If they catch up, I'm dead. The pursuers struggled to move forward, and the ones being chased fled in panic. This was a battle of patience that drained the body of water. The lizardman raiders had drawn their sides and were ready to drink blood. The merchant who was being chased stopped and took a deep breath to recover his strength. He drew his scimitar and was ready to fight for the last time. Just as the battle was about to break out, a shadow covered the sky above them. Are the clouds covering the blazing sun? It's a dragon. It's the tyrant's people. The blue dragon is here. The lizardman warriors who needed to blink from time to time to moisten their eyes did not dare to blink. Even if they were immersed in the emotions of killing, they would not forget what was at the top of the food chain under their feet. They waved their weapons and secretly threw them on the sand. All the warriors slightly bent their knees, not because they wanted to escape. Even if they hid in the sand, they would not be able to avoid the dragon's attack. This action was passed down from the tribe's ancestors who had escaped from the dragon's jaws. When facing a megalosaurus, the best way to escape was to kneel down and use fear to satisfy the powerful predator's pride in exchange for survival. However, Keyes, who was above the two sides, obviously did not want to show mercy. He flew here to cover the traces left by the rattlesnake's relatives when they explored the ruins. In fact, on the way here, he was thinking that if the place where the battery was found was too important, then when he returned, the rattlesnake might be on his hunting list. This is called cleaning up the mess. The dragon's breath plowed through the Lizardman Raiders formation. The strong and fatal electric current directly penetrated the tough skin of these nomads. The lizardmen who faced the dragon's breath directly from the outside to the inside were burned to ashes by the electric current. The lizardmen who were slightly further away endured the numbness brought by the electric current with their strong vitality and struggled to drill into the sand to avoid the dragon's breath. It's still the age limit. Even if the body is strong enough, the dragon's breath is still not strong enough. I still need to continue to practice. There are also some unlucky ones who escaped. What a pity they have to suffer twice. The level 6 evocation spell, Chain Lightning. Keyes snapped his fingers with his dragon claw, and a sparkling electric net with blue light crackled. P.S. Bazaar Market. Chapter 7. The month of Opani was the closest month to the scorching sun in this world. It was also the hottest month in the desert. But even in such weather, there were still people who had goosebumps. It was obviously not because of the cold. It was because of fear. Santos Ben Joser swore that he had been a skilled warrior when he was young. He could even be said to be highly skilled in martial arts. After traveling extensively for so many years, he could also be said to have outstanding courage. But in today's situation, neither martial arts nor courage could calm his heart. Under the gaze of a dragon at such a close distance, fear could not be contained. It would only spread. In fact, the blue dragon did not do anything else. Just the rapid air flow from its breathing was enough to suppress the fat Santos to the ground. Looking at the ferocious dragon's head that was comparable to his own size, and smelling the air that smelled of ionized grass, all the thoughts and ideas of the ordinary merchant lit up like the golden thread smoke that he often enjoyed before dissipating like smoke. The blue dragon, who had wanted to use the lightning net to clear the area, saw a person in the crowd emit the light of a magical item. The merchant had a lot of life-saving equipment. In addition to the ring of stone protection and the boots of agility, he even had a talisman that could resist elemental damage. It was this talisman that helped Santos block the fatal lightning net and only suffered some flesh wounds. Rich people. But why would they come to the dragon's lair? Aren't there trade routes far away from the dragon's lair? Keyes, who was in charge of patrolling the territory, naturally knew that this land was synonymous with forbidden land for ordinary merchants. Anyone with common sense knew that the megalosaurus had a monomaniacal love for wealth. The caravans that passed through this land were undoubtedly like camels that were sending themselves to the jaws of sand hyenas. But what should be done still had to be done. Just as Keyes was about to use his sharp claws to send the merchant to the undecided battle with the Lizardmen Raiders, the fat merchant suddenly raised a palm-sized badge, as if he had a good idea. This area is the territory of the Blue Dragon Lord. This Blue Dragon must be under his jurisdiction as well. To ordinary traveling merchants, the Dragon Lair territory was naturally a forbidden area. However, as the most successful group of merchants, Santos's Sand Rhino caravan had taken the risk of doing business with the Dragon's Nest. The megalosaurus also had a demand for goods. The expensive spices of human society, the tapestries used to decorate nests, the papyrus scrolls used to transcribe texts, and even the iron and weapons needed by the megalosaurus kin tribes were all brought by foreign caravans. It was just that the megalosaurus rarely paid with money. However, if the goods were well matched, they would be valuable and not too expensive. They could still exchange for something from this powerful tribe. For example, the sand that was mixed with dragon blood during the fight between the young dragons, the dragon scales and dragon teeth that the megalosaurus had replaced, the remains of some exotic magical beasts in the desert, and even some goods that the megalosaurus had left behind after robbing other caravans. As long as he could exchange for these things and sell them, he would be able to make a lot of profit from this trip. The caravans recognized by the dragon, Lair would be given a badge by Sirota. The badge was a contractual magic tool made from broken scales. According to the agreement, the holder had to provide services or goods to Sirota and the Blue Dragon tribe on time. In exchange, the holder of the badge would not be attacked for no reason in the Dragon Lair territory. The holder of the badge would receive the protection of the legendary Megalosaurus when transporting goods to the Dragon Lair. The members of his family and various kin tribes in his territory would also provide some convenience. I am a merchant who provides services to the great Thunder Lord, the owner of the Dragon Lair, the legendary Megalosaurus Sirota. I receive the protection of the Blue Dragon tribe on this land. Santos shouted a long sentence in one breath, holding the badge high above his head with both hands. He seemed to have used up all his courage with that one sentence. He did not dare to raise his head and look directly at the terrifying Blue Dragon keys, Feinstein. This won't be easy. This merchant has the old man's token badge. The Blue Dragon's claws stopped before they pierced deeply into the merchant's flesh. They only scratched his skin a little. Silencing, Santos would trigger the marking magic left by Sirota, which would let the legendary Megalosaurus know. It would then be even harder for him to cover up this discovery. But we can't just let this person go. After all, this place is too close to the place we want to explore. The young Blue Dragon subconsciously swung his tail, stirring up a large amount of sand and scattering it all over the merchant. However, he did not dare to move, for fear of angering the giant beast in front of him. "Mortal, you and your companions have disturbed Keys's daily work," the Blue Dragon said a little uneasily. "I am a noble of the Duke of Thunder. I am not partners with those greedy and ignorant lizardmen raiders. In fact, they were the ones who robbed my caravan. It will take half an hourglass in the northeast direction, about 2 apels, to find the caravan of loyal and pitiful merchants who were slaughtered." Santos tried his best to squeeze out tears. He hit his head on the ground and swore to the heavens that he was definitely not with the lizardmen. He was just a pitiful merchant who had been robbed. Those lizardmen chased after him for so long and still did not give up. It could only mean that this merchant has something they need, or he has a treasure on him. The Blue Dragon secretly used arcane vision on himself and observed carefully. This fat merchant did have a few enchanted tools on him, such as boots, a ring on his hand, and the elemental resistance amulet around his neck. Oh, and the badge that Sirota gave him. However, the magic light of these enchanted tools had already dimmed. Finally, the Blue Dragon's gaze focused on the scroll hanging on the merchant's belt. The merchant had deliberately hidden this item behind his back. Unfortunately, the Blue Dragon's arcane vision allowed him to observe from all angles. He did not need to walk behind the merchant to observe. Keys's lips curled into a smile. However, in Santos' eyes, the Blue Dragon's expression became even more ferocious. The Blue Dragon flapped his wings vigorously, and the huge wind pressure made the merchant tumble. The blue dragon reached out with his claws and tore apart Santos' belt, snatching the scroll. "Mortal, I know what you are trying to deceive and hide." The draconic language was composed of short monosyllabic words. The specific words could only be distinguished by the frequency of the sound. When dragons spoke the languages of other races, they would have this kind of accent. It sounded like a loud roar. "It's over. The last thing I have to make a comeback is gone." The merchant sat on the sand with a mournful look on his face as he pulled up his pants without the belt. "I have to think of a way. Now, I can only hope that I can save my life." The blue dragon checked the scroll. He was afraid that there would be explosive runes, acid runes, and other traps. He switched to another arcane vision, Truth Sight. Then, he used the low-level spell, Mage Hand, to open the scroll. Item name, Moon Candy Synthesis Scroll. Usage notes. This is a scroll for the creation of a new type of contraband, Moon Candy. It came from the chaotic city of criminals, Copt. Using this scroll, you can combine the depraved alchemy potion schema into an even more depraved new type of potion, Moon Candy. This potion had a beautiful silver-white color like moonlight, but it was a product from hell. This was the literal meaning. This magic scroll had the unique flavor of Bator and the unique skills of the Batsu people. Chapter 8. The Hell of Bator was a place of withering pity and flourishing resentment. This was the home of the Batsu devil. It was a plane that used the laws of order to explain the essence of evil. It satisfied the imagination of travelers, the greed of treasure hunters, and the rage of paladins. It was the ultimate plane of order and evil, embodying the cruelty of premeditated schemes and cunning. The kingdom of more than 20 evil gods was located in the most famous plane of order and evil in the multiverse. However, even those as noble as they were did not dare to act recklessly there. Apart from the being that lived in Nessus, the bottommost city of Bator that had never failed, the cunning, cruel, and astonishingly capable abomination of Batsu dared to use schemes to subvert and seize various authority and power in the multiverse. It was not strange that the Blue Dragon Keys had discovered the creation of the Batsu Devil in this plane. This race was accustomed to using schemes and tricks to obtain the fallen souls they needed from various planes, and these souls were used to pay for the eternal blood war against the Thali demons in the abyss. It had to be said that this Moon Candy thing was corrupted enough. It was indeed very demonic. A devil's creation. The blue dragon belonged to the evil faction of Order, the Pentashade Megalosaurus, the mother of all evil dragons, the eldest daughter of the ancient creator dragon King Io. The Pentashade dragon Queen Tiamat resided in the Hell of Bator. She was a powerful ally of the existence in Nessus. Because of this, the blue dragon was very familiar with the habits and characteristics of the Batsu devil. Keys did not need to use his toes to think to know that this Moon Candy scroll was part of a scheme to lure people into hell. However, he did not know how many humans had been corrupted in this plane by this item and what kind of devil was behind this scheme. He only had a rough guess. Using such a trick to lure people into depravity was probably not a pit fiend or a burnt offering fiend, a high-ranked Batsu that stood at the top of the pyramid of power in Bator. If a high-ranked devil had such a deep understanding of this plane, he could create an avatar or directly open a gate to hell. Even if they were destroyed or forced to retreat after one night, they would still be able to harvest the souls of a few cities. The efficiency would be much higher than this kind of trick. To be able to slowly infiltrate and study such a thing at the same time, they were either contract demons who played with words or those black-hearted harvester demons. The latter was more likely. Mortal, where did you get this scroll? The blue dragon Keys' huge almond-yellow vertical pupils stared intently at the merchant as he added lie detection in passing. Coptic City. It's Sinpath City. I was originally the boss of the Sand Rhino Caravan, but the last time I was transporting goods, a caravan encountered a sandstorm. The goods and the caravan were buried under the sand dunes. I need to pay a big shot in Gnome City a sum of money, an indemnity that empties the honest Santos of every coin, every coin, every coin, every coin, every coin, every coin, every coin that he hides in his pockets. That's why I took the risk to sell the contraband skuma and this moon candy scroll from Coptic City. There are people in Gnome City who would buy these things at a high price. Those who were under the spell of lie detection would more or less have a tendency to spill the beans. It took Santos a quarter of an hourglass to tell his story of how he had fallen from an honest merchant to an alchemy poison dealer. The lie detection spell's magical aura did not turn red in arcane vision. Merchant, seeing that you have served Sirota, I can spare your life for now. I can also return this fallen enchantment scroll to you so that you can preserve your laughable dignity in Gnome. The fat merchant's face lit up, and a hint of excitement flashed across his face. As long as he could get this scroll back, he could make up for the loss of the caravan, and even pay off part of the debt owed to the first consul's family. But if the blue dragon was really so generous, then his alignment would deviate from the evil Penishade dragons. Of course, if the good metal dragons found out that he dared to transport contraband scrolls, they would most likely kill an evil merchant like him. However, I'm not forgiving you for your offense. You have to provide bail for yourself. Honorable Duke of Thunder, I am willing to pay bail, but I don't have a single copper debenture on me right now. The merchant did not seem to be so afraid when it came to business transactions that he was good at. He rolled his eyes and said, "Perhaps I can use services of equivalent value as bail." "Sure, but we need to draw up a valid contract." The Blue Dragon had a certain association with the speculation just now. Since the Batsu people, who were also of the evil lawful alignment, could use contracts and schemes to achieve their goals, then he could do it himself. The merchant seemed to be very capable, and it was only a moment of misfortune that put him in danger. Keyes himself had the responsibility of patrolling the territory of the dragon's lair, and if he could make use of this convenience, letting the merchant lead more caravans through the territory could greatly shorten the distance of some of the original trade routes and save more time. Time was life, and time was money. The drafting of the contract was naturally not written on ordinary papyrus and bound by secular laws. Keyes chose to imitate the Batsa Devil's method, which was to directly communicate with the flowing River Styx and let the merchant sign a River Styx contract with him that was witnessed by the River Styx. The effectiveness of this contract was supervised by the will of the River Styx, and even the gods would have to pay a huge price if they wanted to violate it. The contract was naturally an unequal one. There were no hard and fast rules for Keyes Fetton, the one who drafted it. Santos, the one who signed the contract, had to observe and keep the contents of the contract a secret, complete the development of the trade route through the territory of the dragon's lair with the support of Keyes, pay a 1/10 tax when passing through the territory of the dragon's lair, that is, a business tax of 1/10 of the value of the goods, and when the Blue Dragon Keyes found him in the future, he had to provide help that did not exceed his total wealth, and a series of other terms. However, the situation was beyond his control. In order to survive, the fat merchant had to agree to all the terms of the contract. When the contract was signed, the River Styx that flowed through all the dimensions appeared in front of both parties. The calm, light, red river split into a tributary that was as thick as a finger and ran through the papyrus scroll that contained the agreement. Both of them received the notification that the contract had been signed at the soul level. Mortals, once you violate the River Styx contract, even death is the most luxurious redemption. You're a knowledgeable person, so you should know what to do. After saying that, Keyes did not forget to add a hinting spell on Santos. This enchantment spell could be used to modify a person's subconscious. The effect that the blue dragon implanted on the head merchant could make him ignore the process of signing the contract with the megalosaurus today, and at the same time, he would not forget to fulfill the agreement of the contract. After doing that, the blue dragon Keys secretly revealed an imperceptible smile as he looked at Santos, who was walking toward the oasis outside the Desert of the Dragon's lair. In my previous life, the boss of the company had to go around begging for alms to get investors. In this life, I actually have the opportunity to be a venture capitalist. That's interesting. After confirming that Santos was already under the influence of the hinting spell, he walked toward the desert oasis outside the dragon's lair. Keys did not forget his original plan. He spread his wings and created a strong airflow. It swept up a large amount of yellow sand and covered the last traces of the group of lizardmen raiders or the sand bandits that had turned into charcoal, the existence of Nessus. Asmodeus, the highest demon lord, the unquestionable ruler of the 9 layers of hell. He lives in the Malsham fortress in Nessus, the 9th layer of the Hell of Bator. Even the gods who call the Hell of Bator their home have to be wary of him. Asmodeus is the oldest demon in existence, although some people claim that he is not the first ruler of the Hell of Bator. Chapter 9. Standing on the shady side of the sand dune, the blue dragon looked at the slightly raised mound in front of him and found the entrance to the ruins left behind by the rattlesnake, Patu. It's still a little too small. I can't enter the body of a blue dragon. Even an ordinary teenage dragon would be a little cramped. Keys did not intend to tear down the entrance to the ruins. Instead, he used spell mimicry to turn himself into a human. Due to his age, the spell mimicry only showed the appearance of a 7 to 8-year-old child, but he was extremely tall and muscular like an adult. Magic mimicry could not make clothes appear out of thin air. So after casting this spell, Keys Fetton turned into a topless child. Dragons did not feel ashamed of being naked, but he was different. Anyone with the mental age of a 30-year-old on Earth would not be able to explore the ruins so calmly naked. Fortunately, I thought of this problem in advance and made preparations. While burying the lizardmen raiders, Keys took off the leather armor that looked relatively clean. He even extravagantly used the water-making spell to communicate with the water elemental plane and washed the leather armor clean. So after the spell mimicry, he quickly put on the armor that had already been washed. The crypt that the rattlesnake said was not too deep. I can simply explore it today. If I can't complete it, I'll deal with the entrance after I come out and guess blindly. The blue dragon turned into a teenager wearing a slightly tight leather armor and holding a scythe sword that had melted and condensed into a wave-like shape due to the high temperature. He strode forward through the cover of the cave entrance to the ruins. Robber's Cave, ruins, treasures. Why do I feel like I've transmigrated into a grave robber's novel? I'm going to need to light a candle in the southeast corner of the cave. If the blue dragon teenager had walked in this cave on his own in his previous life, he would definitely not have the courage to think so much. The blue dragon's spell mimicry only turned his body into a human, but he was still a young dragon that was not inferior to the average teenage dragon. Powerful strength flowed through his muscles, and his sharp claws and teeth only changed their appearance. Under his seemingly fragile skin, there were dark, scaly patterns. More importantly, he could cast familiar spells at will. I feel like I wouldn't be afraid even if a big dumpling suddenly jumped out. These idle thoughts didn't last long. Rattlesnakes were experts at digging holes. They had cast the spell Sand to Stone on every load-bearing node of the tunnel, forming a solid scaffold-like structure. The reinforced tunnel went deep into the ground at a slightly steep angle. Although it was dangerous for ordinary human explorers to walk at such an angle, it was not an obstacle for creatures like the rattlesnake or the blue dragon. Keyes jumped from time to time, using the vertical drop to slightly increase his speed. Soon, the blue dragon reached the bottom of the tunnel. The rattlesnake had carefully arranged a few forked caves to confuse any creatures that might enter by coincidence. There were also quicksand traps in the forks. If one was not careful enough and did not have the ability to dig through the ground, it was very easy to lose one's life. This arrangement is not bad. The blue dragon, like the rattlesnake, had the ability to see in the dark and did not need to carry any light to survive underground. Keyes carefully examined the traps left by Pa Tuesday. They were set up very professionally, even better than he had imagined. It was impossible to tell which path was a trap and which was the real path just by looking at the external traces of digging. Well, it's almost there. If there was a person who could use prophecy magic here, it would be easy to find the right path. Keyes thought for a moment and decided to prepare some lead powder when he came back later. As long as the lead powder was mixed into the sand at the forks, it should be able to interfere with some simple prophecy magic. This is the best we can do at present. Powerful spellcasters can master more spells. No matter how many spells they do, they can still reach their final goal. It can only be used to guard against some adventurers who accidentally break in and are not strong enough. Of course, Pa too had told Keyes that the path was the right path. He walked into the second inconspicuous tunnel on the left. The winding path was about less than 200 centimeters long, which was less than 30 meters. Keyes found the place where the rattlesnake found the lead-acid battery left behind by the ancient civilization. It was a huge warehouse-like ruin. Keyes estimated that the size of the warehouse could easily fit a creature like Sirota, who was about to become an extremely old dragon. The warehouse was a regular rectangular structure, which was obviously a sign of artificial creation. The passage that the blue dragon Keyes used to come in was dug out from the broken crevice of the huge landfill. Keyes reached out his finger and removed a small part of the magic camouflage. He used his sharp nails to touch the wall of the entrance to the ruin. A material similar to cement was used to build the wall of the landfill. Keyes rubbed the gray debris that fell from the wall and dug out a large piece of cement. He found that there were metal strips used to reinforce the structure. The blue dragon, who had night vision, found the traces of the rattlesnake climbing down the wall of the warehouse. There were some crater-like fragments on the floor of the warehouse. Looking at the scratches of the claws, it was probably the crates that Patu had opened before. Keyes jumped down from the hole, but he did not land vertically. He stepped on the holes left by the rattlesnake's claws when it climbed the wall and landed lightly on the ground. The air was a little stuffy. Perhaps this warehouse had ventilation before, but after so many years, the yellow sand had probably buried the ventilation pipes. For his own safety, the blue dragon used a spell to resist the harsh environment, which allowed him to not worry about oxygen consumption for a certain period of time. With the ability to see objects in the dark, the blue dragon Keyes carefully checked some of the original goods in this warehouse. Most of the goods were packed in crates, and these crates originally had some labels on them. However, due to the passage of time, most of the paint had evaporated and disappeared. Only some black paint remained, and there was a faint color residue on the crates. He still used his arcane vision to check, but there was no magic light. Quess opened a few crates and found several lead-acid batteries that looked the same. These lead-acid batteries are very likely to form a battery pack. Could it be that the ancient civilization also strongly advocated green energy? According to the discovery of the legendary Megalosaurus Sirota, the owner of the Dragon's Nest, when he excavated this ruin, the ancient civilization must be a country that flourished with magic. If they needed electricity, there must be a solution that could use magic, so why would they need to make these lead-acid batteries? Chapter 10. It doesn't look like an ordinary warehouse. It looks more like a finished product distribution center in a factory. Keyes, who had transformed into a human teenager, walked between the remnants of what looked like scaffolding and patiently checked every corner of the warehouse. Finally, under the remnants of the collapsed scaffolding, Keyes found a metal riveted track hidden by sand and sand. And this undoubtedly confirmed part of his guess. If this track is used to transport finished products to the finished product distribution center, then following this track, combining his own guess, he stroked the cargo transport track on the ground bit by bit. The Blue Dragon teenager groped his way to a wall in a corner of the crypt. Brushing away the accumulated dust on the wall, a metal shutter door painted with words and symbols appeared in front of Keyes. The teenager searched for a while on the nearby wall and finally found a password lock made of what looked like a protective box made of plastic material and embedded with metal gears. After trying to fiddle with the password lock a few times, Keyes found that the gears were rusted. If he guessed correctly, the latch on the inside of the door should be like the password lock on the outside. In this way, using the spell, knocking spell, specially invented for opening the door, might not work. In desperation, Keyes could only choose the method of forceful demolition. And to his surprise, the metal shutter door made of an unknown alloy seemed to be very sturdy. Even if Keyes reverted to the body of a megalosaurus and used all his strength to hit it, he could only create some dents and deformations. Fortunately, the Blue Dragon teenager was quick-witted and changed his mind in time. He did not continue to compete with the metal shutter, but instead tried to make a new passage from the wall next to it. The materials used to build this place were really sturdy, probably not inferior to reinforced concrete. Keyes, who was not very proficient in the spell Rock Walk, did not dare to use the spell to directly pass through the rock layer. He was worried that if he made a mistake and got trapped inside, it would be troublesome. He chose to rely on the Blue Dragon's own digging skills. This was the Blue Dragon's specialty to carry out the excavation work. When he felt that his claws were about to be ground flat by the concrete-like construction material, he finally dug a passage that went straight into the space behind the metal roller gate. Keyes' body was enchanted with a spell that could resist harsh environments, so he didn't have to worry about the lack of oxygen in this space. So he walked straight in. This was a space that no one had set foot in for tens of thousands of years. The interior was originally pitch black, without the slightest bit of light. Even though the Blue Dragon was born with dark vision, which allowed it to rely on other forms of observation to see things even when it was blind. However, after entering such an ancient ruin, being able to observe more carefully meant that there would be less danger and more discoveries. Therefore, Keyes summoned an illuminating orb as a light source as soon as he set foot in the area. Without any heat, the extremely bright light instantly dispelled the darkness that occupied this place. Behind the metal roller gate was a small corridor, and the ground was paved with tracks that extended from deeper into the building, which were suspected to be used for transporting goods. Perhaps it was due to the high, airtight quality of the passageway. The color of the walls had yet to fade. There were even some text-like symbols that remained on the walls. Whitman's 13th Manufacturing Workshop. Using the language proficiency spell, Keyes identified the meaning of these symbols. As he speculated, there was indeed an industrial workshop called Whitman's 13th Manufacturing Workshop hidden inside, and the words on the wall recorded the production specifications of this factory. After carefully studying the contents of the words on the wall, Keyes entered the factory through the passageway used for transporting goods. Unlike the distribution warehouse outside where the battery packs were stored, this factory workshop occupied twice the area of the former or even more. The crates outside that contained lead-acid battery products didn't fill the entire workshop, but some were placed at the exit where the products were packaged. Occupying the largest area of the workshop was a winding conveyor belt. There was actually a production line here. Keyes carefully observed this industrial creation that surprised him. He even found some constructs that seemed to be used for automatic product processing around the conveyor belt. A few machines that looked similar to the automatic processing constructs were scattered around near the passageway used for transporting goods. They were like spiders with 8 metal limbs. 6 of them were used to support the body, while the other 2 stretched out near the head and had a 3-finger structure at the end of the limbs. The spider-shaped constructs near the conveyor belt were probably responsible for transporting goods because there were rectangular grooves on their backs that were just the right size to fit the crates. There were also 2 metal tires on their abdomens that could fit the eye-shaped tracks. Using the spell mimicry again to transform himself into a human, Keyes first touched these mechanical constructs lightly and found that there was no reaction. He then casually touched them and found that the surface of these metal constructs was actually not covered with any dust. After carefully observing for a while, the young blue dragon Keyes couldn't hold back his curiosity. Seeing that there were quite a number of constructs of various types, he opened up the outer shell of a metal spider to take a look. After opening the shell, he found that the interior of these metal spiders had a control system similar to a circuit board that was connected by gears and copper wires. This control system was connected to various parts of the body through cables. And as for the power system to drive these constructs, it was powered by the lead-acid battery that was previously discovered. However, as the battery pack had not been replaced for thousands of years, there were some rust leaks that caused it to stop working. These were poles apart from the design principles of most intelligent constructs that were created by magic infused with elemental essences. Instead, they were more like some of the technological creations that Keyes was more familiar with. Isn't this an intelligent robot used to transport materials and produce finished products in a fully automated production workshop? Or perhaps a guard in a factory? Quest took apart another metal spider that was slightly larger in appearance. This metal spider's outer shell was composed of multiple layers of composite armor structure, and there wasn't a single gap. Keyes could only forcefully twist off one of its joints and slowly pry open the armor that protected the internal control panel. As if to confirm his guess, the armor of this metal spider had a completely different functional module than the other constructs that were used as transportation tools. It had a ballista structure that could fire continuously and a special magic circle structure that could be used to fix a staff and automatically drive it to cast spells. Sure enough, the ancient civilization also had considerable attainments in the field of magic. Quest used his finger to caress the magic runes under the protection of the outer layer of the armor, which had not been damaged even after thousands of years. He then looked at the ballista, which had already tightened its bowstring, thanks to the leakage of the batteries of these automatons, which caused them to lose their mobility. Otherwise, we might have to fight when we come in, and it would take some effort. After inspecting a few metal spiders, Keyes carefully observed the other parts of the fully automated production workshop buried underground. The entire floor of the workshop was covered with wavy anti-skid stripes. Quest's footsteps resounded as he stepped on the metal plates. There were lighting lamps hanging on the ceiling of the workshop, but due to the lack of energy supply, they were all in a state of extinguishment, like some useless decorations. Before Keyes transmigrated, he had visited some automated workshops for work reasons. In such workshops where machines replaced human labor, man-machine separation was an important safety measure. But in order to repair or regulate the production machinery, when designing and building such a factory, there would be an operation cubicle reserved for senior engineers. Even in different worlds, the basic concept of industrial production should be the same. In this automated workshop of the ancient civilization, which had obviously surpassed the productivity level of this world, there should be a similar design of operation cubicle. Keyes believed that as long as he could find such a place for professionals to operate the machinery in the workshop, he would be able to gain the most from this adventure. The wires in the metal spiders were intact, and all the parts were intact. It was only because of battery leakage that they could not be activated. The technical principle of processing or manufacturing some lead-acid batteries was not complicated. With the help of magic, Keyes was confident that he could independently manufacture a batch of the same energy modules. If he could find an operation cubicle that could control these machinery, the workshop would not continue to be so quiet. With an automated processing factory that far exceeded the current world's productivity, it could bring great wealth and power to the Blue Dragon teenager. There was always a reward for the effort. After tirelessly exploring every corner of the workshop 2 or 3 times, Keyes finally found the entrance to the operation cubicle at an egg-shaped grid structure. Before finding it, Keyes had always thought that it was one of the ventilation devices that had the same shape as other ventilation devices. Fortunately, he finally found a gap on the side of the grid fence that was blocked by dust. The blocked gap looked exactly the same as other ventilation openings. The cemented dust could not stop the Blue Dragon teenager's strength. He just pulled hard on the grid fence, and the binding of the dust-cemented material was torn apart. The key was that there was a pneumatic gate that led to the operation cubicle. Its material was as sturdy as the rolling gate that he had encountered before. Keyes had no choice but to transform into the Blue Dragon form and use his claws to tear apart a large part of the wall before he could completely dismantle it. After that, the Blue Dragon teenager was finally able to step into the core operation cubicle of the 13th manufacturing workshop. Chapter 11. As soon as the pneumatic door that sealed the control room was opened, Keyes could smell a strange smell that had been sealed for a long time drifting out from the inside of the small room. Megalosaurus had a super keen sense of smell, except for the black dragons that liked to roll in the mud of the swamp and would not be happy without rotten meat. The other Megalosaurus were quite disgusted by the stench. Keyes was no exception. When he smelled the stench in his human form, he covered his mouth and nose with his hand. If he was not worried that he would accidentally damage some of the internal equipment due to rapid oxidation, he would have used a wind spell to inject fresh air into the room to clean it up, just like in a third-rate horror movie. A room with a strange stench and a cramped and dark space must be mixed with death as a strong medicine to set the atmosphere. As our protagonist, the young Blue Dragon Keyes walked into the control center of the automatic factory. He found a shriveled corpse sitting on a chair glancing at the exit of the room with empty eyes. If such a scene appeared in front of him before he transmigrated, Keyes would definitely be scared out of his wits and run away immediately. But as a Blue Dragon, even if he was still a young dragon, he would not be scared by a mere mummy unless it was a demigod mummy. But that was impossible. The shriveled corpse was just an ordinary humanoid creature caused by dehydration after death. It had nothing to do with a legendary undead creature. So the dead man's gaze did not attract much attention from Keyes. Instead, it was the machine in front of the shriveled corpse lying on the control table that aroused Keyes's interest. The central control center of the control room of the ancient civilization's manufacturing factory was actually a form that he was quite familiar with: a dashboard, an operating keyboard, and a screen. In this fantasy world, he could actually see a creation in the form of a computer that was commonly seen in the technological world. This made the young Blue Dragon feel a little out of place. The control room was said to be cramped when compared to the production workshop outside. The area inside was dozens of square meters with a living room, a bathroom, and a workshop. It seemed to be an arrangement for the staff on duty to monitor the situation for a long time. Respect for the dead was the custom of the Chinese family. Out of respect for the dead, Keyes first moved the mummified human remains into the living room before he started to check the complicated instruments on the console. Just like how a novice who had no experience with electronic devices could quickly find the power button, Keyes quickly found this conspicuous button. Unexpectedly, when he pressed the power on button, the screen in front of the console actually reacted, and a paragraph of text appeared. With the help of language proficiency, Keyes understood the meaning of these words. Equipment energy depleted. Emergency energy needed to be recharged. As Keyes recognized these words, 2 connection devices for emergency energy supply popped up on the console. One of the interfaces had a structure that could clamp a cube, which was obviously compatible with a battery. The other interface popped out a prismatic crystal. This crystal was embedded with complex magic runes. Although it was slightly different from the existing magic system, some commonalities could still be found through comparison to achieve identification. By identifying the runes, Keyes found some rune structures that represented magic power absorption. 2 interface modes. One is to plug in the battery. The other is to instill magic power. This is in line with the fantasy setting. If a lead-acid battery was enough to replenish the energy of this machine, then the consumption of another mana recharging method wouldn't be too much of a burden to Quess. Therefore, the Blue Dragon teenager thought for a moment and used his hand to hold the crystal prism that was used as the charging interface. He did not want to run outside to search for batteries that could still be used. As expected, once he held it, the crystal prism began to automatically draw energy from the Blue Dragon teenager's body, and the screen in front of the console also showed a charging progress bar. Keyes estimated that after using up his magic power to cast a secondary lightning chain, the machine's charging was almost complete. A new text prompt appeared on the screen. The energy required to start up operation has been met. The automatic factory power supply unit has lost connection. Currently, the automatic control production system cannot be used. Do you want to transfer to the personal application system? Of course, he chose yes, or else the energy previously instilled would not be wasted. Following the operation instructions, Keyes found the keyboard button to enter the machine. When he pressed it, he felt a little sluggish. Perhaps it was because it had been too long, so he increased his strength. An imperceptible pain stimulated his skin. Keyes raised his hand and saw a small needle hole that had already healed. The thin needle that quickly popped out and then retracted on the surface of the button had pierced the Blue Dragon teenager's finger and collected his blood. Warning: genetic material test results. Not the previous operator. Activating self-locking drive. Countdown begins. Before Keyes could react, the text on the screen in front of him changed again. Test results corrected. Possesses the genetic information of a high-grade modified person. Possesses high-grade authority. Warning lifted. This sudden change made Keyes feel like he was in a fog, but he still had a rough guess in his heart. This might have something to do with his dragon egg being found in this ancient ruin. It might have undergone some genetic modification before he was born. Therefore, this advanced industrial production central control computer determined that he had high-grade authority. And the most direct manifestation of this high-grade authority was that after the machine was turned on, all the records of the previous operator were directly set to the retrieval mode for Keyes to review. The first document that popped up was the detailed information of the previous operator of this central control computer, honorary engineer Cotman. It turned out that the words Cotman 13th Manufacturing Workshop that he saw on the wall outside referred to the family of this honorary engineer. As a famous engineer family, Cotman's life introduction and his personal habits were recorded in this document. Even his personal hobby of smoking cigars and collecting antique guns was not left out. Other than this document, the remaining contents included Cotman's personal diary and the operating manual of the automation system, which interested Keyes very much. Therefore, he first clicked on the document icon that represented Cotman's personal diary. According to the description, it stored some of the user's research information and daily records. Imaska Nu Ephemeris, March 11th, 4523. Today, I celebrated my 135th birthday and mourned for my deceased wife. The reason why I have so much free time is because the factory's equipment is undergoing an upgrade of the man-made weave. The great mechanic still had a meeting with the ruler of Netheril, although the Elder Council did not think it was a good idea. After all, our civilization has disappeared from the world of Toril for a long time. In essence, we can no longer be considered the same race. In the thousands of years of colonization in the astral world, we have a completely different development path and culture from the original race. Imaska Nu Ephemeris, June 13th, 4525, 3 colonial planets were attacked and destroyed. The enemies were not bad embryos from the bottomless abyss and Bator. They were actually created by the Imasker themselves. It was exactly the same as the destruction of the ancient Imasker civilization. They reaped what they sowed, completely reaped what they sowed. Just a year ago, the great mechanic and the people of the Spell Council claimed that they had created a new magic device that was safer and more efficient than the 7 ancient secret devices. It was a kind of seal that could use a curse to weaken the crystal wall, leading the Imasker people to leave the universe that was hostile to some gods and ancient evil creatures. It was a pity that this magic device had just been created, and before it could reach the border of the crystal wall system, it was disrupted and activated by the chaotic laws emanating from the Sea of Chaos. Why did they not believe in the power of technology? Why did they not believe in the Elder Council? Why did they keep trying to create dangerous magic devices that could not be controlled? Imaska Nu Ephemeris, November 11th, 4535. After 10 years, everything was finally coming to an end. The great Arcanist allies of Netheril had sent their most advanced floating cities to participate in the battle. The spellcasters and researchers had joined forces and gathered all the researchers of the Sorcerer Council and the Elder Council to carry out the experiment of adaptive curse-resistant organism modification. It was almost completed. Some kind gods had even thrown themselves into the fight against the evil creatures that emitted the power of chaos and curses. Although it could not offset our mistakes, all the Imasker people had contributed their own strength. The annihilation battleships produced by the Altori family carried the warriors from all over the multiverse to fight against the evil creatures. The Portman family, which was also our people's factory, provided the warriors with the best weapons and equipment free of charge, such as laser guns and electromagnetic energy shields that did not require any magic enchantment but were more effective. Imaska Nu Ephemeris, June 8th, 4536. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. There was nothing new under the sun, and all natural disasters were actually attributed to man-made disasters. As it turned out, this disaster was orchestrated by that shameless great wonder machinist. He was the sinner who shamed all of the Imasker people. The evil creature was not created to let the Imasker people live a better life in the new world, but to satisfy his evil and greedy ambition. He wanted to weaken all the gods and steal their glory. Imaska Nu Ephemeris, January 1st, 4537, the Great Mechanic. No, I should call him by his filthy name, Polizaros, was destroyed by the gods in the end. He and the creation of his ambition were destroyed at the same time. The disaster was finally averted, but the retribution had to be borne by all the Imasker people. Most of the gods who fought against Polizaros fell into eternal slumber, causing the multiverse itself to loathe the Imasker people. Coupled with the curse of the evil creature before its death, the place where the Imasker people lived became an uninhabitable desert, and all of them were inexplicably infected with an unknown plague. Batches of Imasker people gradually weakened and died, and we were powerless to reverse the situation. After reading the last diary of Mr. Cotman of Imaska and looking back at the dried corpse in the operating room of the operation room, Keys gently rubbed his neck which was a little sore from staring at the screen for a long time, and fell into deep thought. Although Cotman's diary was only a few words, there was still some information from the decades of records. Now he could confirm that the civilization in this land was indeed created by the remnants of the ancient Imasker people. However, they were tragically wiped out by the evil Great Mechanic's death-seeking scheme, and even their living place became a desert. This was probably why this world was called the Ashen World. In the latter part of Wertmann's narration, it was mentioned that in order to fight against the evil creatures that spread curses and chaos, the mages and scientists of the Imaska survivors worked together. The goal was to create modified warriors that could resist the effects of the curse with their own adaptability. The dragon egg that the legendary Megalosaurus Sirota found when exploring the ruins was very likely to be the material of this experiment, or even the product of a phased experiment. If this speculation was true, it would explain why the computer passed the authorization verification after collecting a blood sample when it was activated, and why his innate adaptability was much better than that of the average dragon. However, this was not absolute. After all, the information provided in the diary was still too little, and this was only an energy component production factory of Cotman's family, not the technological core of the ancient civilization. After sorting out his thoughts, Keyes continued to seize the time to search for useful information from the computer. It would be perfect if he could find some maps with the buildings of the Imasker civilization. Then he could follow the map and slowly explore the other ruins of this civilization in the future and piece together more and more complete information. Chapter 12. Find a small human. Hit him. Hit him hard. Hit him until he can't make a sound. Throw him into the fire. Don't wait for him to be burnt. Eat him. Blue was reading a book called Cooking Guide for Ogres. He muttered the recipes in the book as if he was memorizing them. If it weren't for the clanking sounds of the pig iron chains hanging from his feet, this strong ogre slave would have looked like a scholar when he was trying his best to read. Don't be noisy, stupid, filthy. The warrior who was patrolling the group of slaves on horseback was about to give the nagging and annoying monster a warning, but the warrior was too lazy to do so. But before the tip of his whip could touch the monster, the two equally large ogres behind the monster looked at him with unfriendly gazes. In the dark night, their eyes glowed with a faint green light. They seemed to be looking at food. The warrior swallowed his saliva and cursed, "A nest of monsters." He turned his whip and hit the butt of the desert horse. He ran to the back of the group of slaves. Blue, Naru, and Par were rare ogre triplets. Adult ogres were more than 9 to 10 centimeters tall, which was around 3 meters tall. They weighed around 500 to 700 pounds, which was almost a third of a ton. These monsters had a single horn on their heads. Their light blue and light yellow tumor-like skin and a thick layer of fat protected their bodies. In the eyes of other intelligent creatures, ogres were stupid, ugly, and greedy large humanoid creatures. They were one of the creatures that were inherently evil. They were social creatures and had strong adaptability to the environment. Even if they didn't eat or drink for a month, they could survive tenaciously. They relied on raiding other intelligent creatures' tribes or hunting for food. The flesh of various humanoid creatures was their favorite food. Because of this, they were called ogres. They would even eat the corpses of their own kind. But in the eyes of the ogres, it was the opposite. Even young ogres could speak Jotun, Beast Man, and Knoll in addition to their own language. The smarter ones could even learn the complicated Elvish and the awkward Draconic. This was not a sign of stupidity, but of intelligence. As for his fondness for the flesh and blood of humanoid creatures, it was only one of his appetites. In fact, apart from hunting and plundering, ogres rarely tortured or enslaved other races or even their own kind like other intelligent creatures. As for eating the corpses of their own kind, It was to allow their flesh and blood to continue living in their own bodies. Ogres would never take the initiative to kill their own kind for food. That was a disgraceful act. At the same time, compared to the other races, ogres rarely discriminated against humans. For their compatriots, even if they were weak cubs or old men on the verge of death, the clan would share the food they harvested with them and protect them. Moreover, as long as one could fully understand the characteristics of the ogres, any race could form a hunting group with them and share the spoils. Of course, few other intelligent creatures could understand this ogre philosophy. In fact, other than trolls and orcs who had similar customs, there were very few intelligent creatures that could become hunting partners for the ogres instead of food. Powerful, cunning, and use violence to solve all problems. This was the common understanding that other intelligent creatures had of the ogres. Brew, don't read it out loud. I'm already sick of eating these dried rations made from fermented animal organs and wheat bran. He chased away the patrolling warriors as if he had done something insignificant. One of the ogre triplets, Neru, waved his shockingly heavy-spiked ebony club and lightly knocked on Brew's head. In the eyes of others, this was no different from murder, but to the ogre brothers with thick skin and flesh, this was a simple joke. Ouch, Brew won't be able to remember the recipes in these books if he hurts his head. Another brother, Paulu, was laughing heartily at the side. The sounds of the three ogres bantering in their native language sounded like loud roars to the other creatures, causing the other slaves to hide as far away as they could. The quarreling of the ogre brothers could be heard at the front of the group. The leader of the caravan on the two-humped camel frowned. He was about to flare up, but gave up in the end. It's better not to provoke those three monsters. If they really start a riot, these hired warriors might not be able to suppress them. The merchant's eyebrows twitched uncontrollably as he recalled the scene of the three ogre brothers massacring in the arena. That memorable scene made the merchant's eyebrows twitch uncontrollably. The merchant sat on the two-humped camel, holding the dragon scale badge bestowed upon him by the legendary Megalosaurus Sorota in his hand. In order to conserve water, they could only travel at night. The desert was always more lively at night than the blazing sun in the sky. Only the aura of the badge bestowed upon them by Sorota could ensure their safety in this desert ruled by a dragon's nest. They had set off from the city of pebbles and salt, Shaka. This city was built near an ancient alkali lake and was the largest salt producer in the Medici Empire. Only a few of the nobles could afford the fine sea salt shipped from the more distant coastal cities. Most of the salt in the diet of the Medici came from the several large salt pans around Chaka. Countless caravans selling salt came to Shaka, causing the city to always be so crowded and noisy. The noisiest place was the Colosseum built from gravel in this commercial city. It was left behind from the ancient times. The Colosseum was always full. During the performances, beasts would be released from the ring and people would be pushed onto the stage. The beasts would eat the people, and the people would fight. Slave gladiators and various beasts would use flesh and blood, roaring and wailing to entertain the audience from all over the world. Only the bravest and most fearless fighters would have a chance at survival. These fighters of various races were the bravest and most fearless of their own race. As slaves, they were also the most valuable. As a tribute merchant specially approved by the ruler of the Dragon's Nest, the Epicurus had to sell the best slaves from all over the world to the Dragon's Nest territory to satisfy the needs of the great and cruel Duke of Thunder, the legendary Megalosaurus Sorota, to build an army and build the Dragon's Nest. The supply of goods in Shaka's gravel Colosseum was always the best. The strong slaves were never like other places, where they were trained according to the standards of Bite. They were obedient and weak. The tribute in the Dragon's Nest, the slaves that were sold, and the new goods that were harvested could be sold in cities like Nome. Every gold pharaoh, silver cate, and copper deben that were exchanged were used to purchase spices that were scarce inland and worth more than gold. They were then sold back to inland commercial cities like Shaka to earn more profits. This formed a stable business cycle. Merchants pursued profits, and the circulation of goods brought about increased profits. This is the secret of the Epicurus. This is the secret of the Epicurus family that will rise in the future. Chapter 13. These three ogres will definitely satisfy the needs of the dragon's lair's ruler. What price should I ask for? Epicurus pondered as he rode on his camel. The scene of the person in charge of selling slave fighters in the arena introducing the three monsters with enthusiasm and saliva flying everywhere seemed to still be in his ears at this moment. These are the rare triplets of desert ogres. Even ferocious lions are as obedient as kittens in front of them. They can catch up to the fastest horses on foot. Ordinary blades can't even cut through their tough skin. There was no doubt that the introduction had been effective. Epicurus had spent a large sum of money to buy the three ogre brothers. However, the first order to disarm them had been rejected by the three brothers and the person in charge of the arena. The weapons were exchanged with their freedom. The armor and other equipment were the rewards for winning the gladiator fights. These are their personal belongings. Even if you buy their contracts, you have no right to take them away. If you insist on doing so, you will have to personally challenge the three brothers and win. Only then can you take away their personal belongings. Epicurus still remembered the slave merchant's serious expression as he explained this to him. May the eternal scorching sun shatter your bones. Even though it had happened 2 months ago, Epicurus couldn't help but curse whenever he recalled it. Fighting the ogres according to the arena's rules. That was simply courting death. None of the slaves he'd bought in the past were as well equipped or as powerful as the three ogres, so it didn't matter. However, in the case of the three ogre brothers, Epicurus managed to convince them to hire dozens of slave hunters as warriors at a discounted price. Thus, it was still hard for them to be at ease. During the process of escorting the ogres, the warriors had reported more than once that the ogres didn't seem to care about the iron shackles between their legs. The strongest ogre, Neru, had even tried to pry open the iron shackles when he was resting as if he wanted to attach a chain to his weapon. As the sand couldn't retain heat, the desert was very cold at night. However, this wasn't a problem for the ogres, who had thick skin. Desert ogres had much better eyesight than humans. Even though they didn't have dark vision that allowed them to see in complete darkness, they could still easily see their surroundings under the light of the moon and stars. The master in front of the team is always looking at us secretly, as if he's afraid we'll eat him. Brew continued to flip through the ogre cooking guide after being taught a lesson by his brothers. He spoke softly to his brothers. "Humph, that little guy is a miser. The shackles he gave us are lousy. They break with a pull, and I can't attach them to my ebony staff," said Neru, who was the strongest of the ogre's brothers. "Neru, you blockhead. The shackles are meant to bind us because they're afraid we'll escape, but the quality is too lousy." Neru held a staff that was made of a creature's spine and skull. He tapped the shackles on his feet, and a liquid seeped out from the skull at the tip of the staff. The shackles that came into contact with the liquid hissed as if they were corroded. The three ogres were wilderness ogres. Compared to ogres that lived in the environment, they required less food, and their bodies were stronger. Brew always had an idea. His dream was to become a gourmet. He learned about the gladiator arena in Shaka City from the little humans that were captured as food. He came up with the idea of becoming a gladiator and exchanging for weapons and armor. He learned how to read in the gladiator arena and collected gourmet books. From the books, he learned that there were large, fat whales in the ancient sea. He used all the metal weapons that he exchanged for to create a whaling harpoon that he would use to obtain gourmet delicacies in the future. Nero always had strength. His dream was to become a blacksmith. This was a craft that he learned from a book brought by a child that was even shorter than the usual little humans. He liked to stand in front of the furnace and swing the hammer to create weapons for himself and his brothers. The molten iron that once burned him became his armor. In the gladiator arena, he was always the first to charge. He used the ebony staff in his hand to smash his opponent's skull. It was not only to prove his courage with brute force, but also to test whether his weapon was sturdy enough and whether the horns on his armor were sharp enough. Nero always had potions. His dream was to become a potion master. The tribe's original ogre shaman taught him how to distinguish between plants and animals, taste toxins, and make potions. In order to thank this selfless teacher, Nero didn't even care if the ogre was a real ogre. He let the ogre's dead body rest in his body, and then made the old ogre's spine and skull into a voodoo staff so that the ogre could still enjoy the joy of battle with him after death. In the gladiator arena, Nero devoted himself to spreading the power of voodoo and collecting all kinds of materials to cultivate voodoo. After every battle, he always had miraculous potions to heal his brothers' wounds and recover their strength. This was the three ogre brothers. Bru always had an idea that Nero always had strength. Nero always had potions. Fearless, brave, and strong. The desert journey at night came to an end as a ray of light appeared on the horizon. At the front of the group, the merchant leader Epicurus gave the order, set up camp on the shady side of the sand dune and set up sentry posts. The camel team will form a circular formation and drive all the goods in. With the order, the entire camel team started to work in an orderly manner that they were already familiar with. There was a large rock on the shady side of the sand dune. After digging the ground a little and laying down a shade cloth, it was a very good resting place. Of course, only the managers and hired warriors of the caravan had the right to enter such a place. This time, they were very lucky. There was a small patch of cactus forest around the rock. As the goods, the slaves only had to carefully avoid the sharp thorns of the cactus and could enjoy the precious shade during the day. The ogre brothers' large bodies couldn't completely avoid the thorns of the cactus forest, but they didn't care too much. Their tough skin provided good protection. The thorns of the cactus couldn't hurt them and could only be crushed. Nero sat on the ground and leaned against a large cactus. He carefully took out a small box made of wood from the bag behind him. He opened the box and dug out some dark green sticky substance that had a pungent smell. He carefully divided it into two portions for his brothers. This was a voodoo potion that he had concocted based on the knowledge of the old troll church. According to the principle that plants could absorb energy through sunlight, he used the method of a voodoo doctor to refine it. Although this ointment couldn't be consumed directly, it could bring a trace of coolness when applied on the head during the day. It could replenish the energy consumed by the scorching sun. He named this new voodoo potion energy ointment. Paro, Nero, these cactus taste good. I can store some in my gourmet box. Do you guys want to try some? Bru used his harpoon to cut open the thorny skin of the cactus and carefully cut the juicy stem into small cubes. From time to time, he would toss the cubes into his mouth to chew and taste them. The cactus had slight toxins that could cause electrolyte disorder to humans. However, to the ogre gourmets who had amazing digestive abilities and poison resistance, these toxins were like a novel condiment. After applying the energy ointment that Paru gave him, Nero, who was the strongest among them, immersed himself in improving the angle of the ram on his armor. From time to time, he would pick up his heavy ebony staff and tighten the thick metal plate wrapped around the tip of the staff. Although he was sitting on the ground, he was still much taller than a normal person. From time to time, he would use his hammer to knock on his armor and weapons. The other slaves who were eager to rest after a night of walking were very irritated, but they didn't dare to say anything. Chapter 14. The thick carpet blocked the heat rising from the ground, and the awning above their heads effectively blocked the scorching of the eternal blaze hanging high above their heads. Epicurus, who had his back against the rock, was a little tired after a night of traveling, but he could not rest immediately. What a bunch of annoying, stupid monsters. The slave merchant could not help but scold as he heard the sound of metal being forged from the slave camp. He did not need to guess to know that it was the tallest ogre fiddling with his weapons. But what a bunch of frighteningly energetic creatures. On one hand, he was annoyed by the noise, but on the other hand, he was envious of the race's unattainable energy. Epicurus snapped out of his daze and focused his gaze on the leather map in his hand. As a successful merchant, and as the head of a merchant who looked forward to even more success in the future, Epicurus had learned a skill early on, the collection and analysis of information. While this trade route had been going on for more than 15 years, the situation in the desert was like an unpredictable sandstorm, which could suddenly appear beside you at any moment. The two desert nomadic elven tribes, Samhain and Salem, actually started a war near the dragon's lair, probably because of that stupid title of Khan. Epicurus twirled his well-maintained goat-like beard, a habit he had when he was deep in thought. While the small squabbles between the two tribes did not enter the eyes of those big shots, it did affect the surrounding trade routes. Now that we're at the edge of the dragon's lair, we still have half a month's journey to reach it. This time, we probably can't go to Nome to buy spices anymore. We have to be careful and go to a city further away. Oh, damn it! The sentry hiding at the top of the sand dune blew the warning horn, startling the merchant who was deep in thought, and he accidentally pulled out a few strands of his beard. In the resting area, a warrior on guard duty broke into Epicurus' tent. He was a caravan guard, not a hired warrior. He was Epicurus' trusted aide, and only he was qualified to break into the merchant's tent. Master Epicurus, there is a situation. We found an unknown number of nomadic cavalry outside of Tu Palesan. They are heading towards the camp of the caravan. The warrior of the caravan explained the situation in a concise manner. Quick, gather the merchant warriors and the hired warriors. Tell them that it's time to fight. Also, give the slaves some food and prepared weapons. And tell them that if they don't want to die, they'll have to fight. Lastly, protect the food and water at the back of the camp. Bury some and hide it well. Epicurus said a long string of words as quickly as he could. He didn't notice that the irritable sound of hammering had stopped for a while. As early as a quarter of an hourglass ago, the ogres had discovered the situation before the sentry. The witch doctor Ogre Paru, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. He stood up straight and stared into the distance with his black pupils, his scar-covered nose twitching slightly. Thanks to his knowledge of voodoo, his sense of smell was the sharpest among the three brothers. Paru, don't make any noise. Brew, put away your food box. The ogre witch doctor stopped one of the brothers who was busy forging, and the other who was using cactus thorns to stab the insects they dug out from the roots of the cactus. He quickly crouched on the ground, his large ears close to the sand, as he carefully identified the situation. The other two brothers who received his message also wrinkled their noses. Although their sense of smell was not as strong as Paru's, their racial instincts allowed them to discover the situation. It seems like there are a lot of little people and camel beasts that they're riding on. They're charging towards us, said the smart and insightful Brew. Maybe there's going to be a battle. This isn't a coliseum. We have to use the method we used in the wasteland. Brew quickly tidied up his food box, stuffing the cut-up cactus stems and the fat and tender insects he found into the empty compartments in the box, and finally closed the lid carefully. He said seriously to Paru, "Remember to save half of your strength. Don't throw away the healing potions Para gave you. If you can't win, run together. Oh, and when you run, bring 1 or 2 little people with you as food reserves." Paru nodded, indicating that he understood. Of the 3 ogre brothers, Brew always had ideas, Paru always had potions, and Paru always had potions. As for Paru, he only needed to have strength. The little people don't smell like human children, but like those tall elves. I estimate there are about 100 of them. There are slightly more camel beasts. The sound of the earth tells us that they don't have heavy armor, so we should be able to deal with them. Paru, who was lying on the ground, stood up and took out 3 water sacks from his belt. These are the latest healing potions. You can drink them to replenish your strength, or you can sprinkle them directly on your wounds. The harvest from the Colosseum gave him more experimental tools and supplies than the old troll who taught him the art of witchcraft. After taking the healing potions from Paru, Paru thought for a moment and untied the 2 hardwood tower shields tied to his arms. The tower shields that only human warriors had the strength to use could only be used as gauntlets for him. Use the molten iron slag to protect Paru. I'll give you the shields first. The elves can shoot arrows, so it'll hurt a little when they hit you. When the 3 ogre brothers finished their preparations for the battle, the sentry post alerted them of an enemy attack. After that, the deployment of the caravan was very fast. The hired warriors rode on desert horses and lined up in a reserve formation to deal with the charge. The guards of the caravan urged the camel drivers to drive the camel beasts to the back of the battle formation, while they drove the goods that they were originally transporting, the group of slaves, to the front of the battle formation and gave everyone a simple weapon and some food. Oh my God, the stinginess of the little leader is beyond my imagination. During the battle, he only gave us some sharpened wooden sticks and some wooden shields that children would use for fighting and playing. Fortunately, Brew is smart and went to the Colosseum to earn money, so we're prepared. Paru glanced at the weapons and equipment that the caravan guards gave to the slaves and servants. He was extremely disdainful of Epicurus. In fact, some of the slave fighters were given weapons made of metal and simple armor sewn from tanned leather. The 3 ogre brothers were even given a fan of dried camel meat. However, this was only the treatment given to the slaves who could fight. Although the preparation for the battle was swift, the horsemen galloping from the distance were faster. The horsemen galloped over from 2 to 3 paressons and stopped a few hundred steps away from the slave battle formation. This was not to show battle etiquette in front of the 2 armies, but to cultivate the horses and accumulate strength for the charge. Epicurus and his trusted guards stood on the sand dune behind the camel caravan and observed the enemy. He took the monocular from one of his trusted guards and observed carefully. This was a high-grade item that he bought from the alchemists. It could easily observe the situation beyond 5 paressons. Chapter 15. Epicurus, who was observing through the monocular, noticed that there was someone carrying a banner in the enemy team. Is this a small team from the Salem tribe? To be qualified to carry the banner, there must be at least one son of the chieftain. The tribal war has spread to this area. After drinking a mouthful of the sour and astringent horse milk wine, Huck Keenan felt a burst of satisfaction after relieving the exhaustion brought to his body by the long journey. The war had engulfed the desert for more than a month. The army's camp had already drained the water from the 2 oases. As one of the chieftain's sons, Hakenan received an order to lead a banner team of tribal warriors to plunder the surrounding caravans to replenish the army's supplies. Thus, he obeyed the order of the future Muad-Dib, the Khan of the desert elves. Riding the six-legged desert horse given by his father, he led his banner team to sweep through the entire desert like a prairie fire. Hakenan Alto, son of Hajar Alto, the enemy-seeking voice, has found the delicious lamb. Use your scimitar to show the bravery of the Salem tribe. The one who communicated with Hanank in a strange, deep voice was an elven chanter who accompanied the army. His face was like a wrinkled, shriveled almond. His pale blue eyes, which had no white in them, shone with excitement. Chanter was a type of spellcaster unique to the desert elves. They were good at using the sound speech technique. A powerful elf chanter could use the sound speech technique to distinguish the caravans, armies, and even herds of beasts from hundreds of palesen through the vibrations of the dry air, cacti, donkey shrubs, sand verbena, would burl oil shrubs. It could also carry out a silent slaughter through the sound of infrasound. Firm flesh, hardwood, and even metal blades would be shattered by it. The more experienced chanter could even use the sound speech technique to simulate the blood-boiling technique of the war shaman priests. It could increase the blood flow of their warriors and greatly increase their fighting spirit. Chanter of wisdom, please bless the warriors with hot blood and fighting spirit. Although Hakenan's tone was respectful, his gaze was still fixed on the caravan in front of him. He watched the slaves and warriors of the caravan line up. "We will follow your will, son of the chieftain." The chant slightly nodded. His simple, chaotic origin voice naturally covered all the tribal warriors. Everyone's faint blue eyes turned slightly bloodshot at this moment. For the glory of Salem, for the glory of Hajar Khan, charge, charge, charge. Hakenan, who was closest to the chanter, felt his blood boiling. He urged his six-legged horse to be the first to charge out of the front line. Behind him was the closest personal guard of the chieftain's son. Behind him were the warriors of the chieftain. Every elven warrior was in high spirits, and every steed was racing to be the first. All slaves, defend yourselves on the spot. Hire warriors to drive away their archers. Don't let them rain arrows recklessly. Epicure knew that he had to trust the judgment of a more professional. His guard commander had been with him for more than 20 years and had encountered similar attacks time and time again. He was better at dealing with the situation than he was. The three ogre brothers who were standing in the middle of the slave front line seemed to have heard the battle cries of the elven chanter due to their excellent hearing. It was as though a basin of hot oil had been poured on their already vigorous fighting spirit. Osha, Osha, Neru, Buru, Paulu, Vidisha. Ogre Voodoo Dr. Paulu gripped his troll staff tightly and prayed for the three brothers in the traditional language of the Ogre Voodoo doctors. The desire for battle in his heart surged like the potion hidden in the troll skull at the tip of his voodoo staff. The shackles that bound the three ogres had been unlocked by the warrior's key. At this moment, the blacksmith, Neru, seemed to have thought of a good idea. A single chain might not be able to bind the three ogres tightly, but 3 chains could be tightly bound together. The ebony staff became an ebony flail. The ebony staff has become an ebony flail. He shouted excitedly in the ogre language while waving his newly created weapon. Neru's huge body and his flail, a weapon with a large area of effect, accidentally sent a few human slaves flying. Those who were hit flew out in pain, with their bodies caved in. They did not even have the chance to scream before they were sent flying. The few caravan guards who were in charge of supervising the battle wanted to take out their knives and teach this reckless monster a lesson, but a sudden sneeze knocked them to the ground. "Oh, sorry." Brew, who always had ideas, spoke in a strange human language with a strange accent. "Just something to refresh myself." The ogre gourmet had a habit of ordering a precious spice called pepper before a battle. Yes, refreshing himself. It was just a few sneezes. After this small problem was overcome, it would not be a problem. He could even try some pepper and spit out a few fireballs during battle. What a great idea! Broo always had good ideas. Seeing the sparks coming out of the ogre's nostrils after a few sneezes, the guards wisely chose to protect themselves and did not bother with the ogre anymore. The desert elves' charge was not in the form of heavy cavalry. Using an analogy, their battle style was more similar to the Mongolian archers on Earth. They would charge at the enemy's battle formation at a specific angle, using the speed of their war horses and sharp shooting skills. They would use a shower of arrows to destroy a corner of the enemy's formation. If the first wave of arrows did not work, the riders would spontaneously let their war horses run in a circular formation. They would then use arrows to attack more intensively or change to another direction to tear open a gap in the enemy's battle formation. The son of the chieftain, Harkonnen, led the charge at the front of the formation. He did not carry a single arrow on his back. Compared to bows and arrows, he was more used to using heavy javelins or throwing spears. At this time, he was carrying 5 javelins with precious metal tips on his back. He would use them to tear open the battle formation and kill the heavily armored warriors. Like a sandstorm, arrows fell from the sky and took away the lives of a large number of slaves in a corner of the battle formation. The commander of the caravan quickly reacted. A group of mercenaries who had been waiting for a long time rode their war horses and charged at the elven archers from the back of the formation while wielding their weapons. Even though their numbers were less than a quarter of the enemy's, their bravery and proficiency in martial arts made up for these shortcomings. A portion of the elven riders could no longer focus on shooting arrows. They drew their scimitars and tangled with the mercenaries of the caravan. Following that, the guards of the caravan drove the slaves and slave fighters who had been given simple weapons to attack. A stalemate appeared on the battlefield. The cries of elves and humans, as well as the neighing of the war horses, caused the situation to go out of control. The commander's orders could not be heard. Everyone who participated in the battle, regardless of whether they were elves or human slaves, followed their instincts to survive and kill. Die. Harkonnen did not equip a shield. He drew a javelin from his back with his left hand, while his right hand waved a sickle sword made of fine iron. He attacked with both hands. The sickle sword in his right hand cleverly knocked away the shields of the mercenaries of the caravan, while the javelin in his left hand took advantage of the loophole in the enemy's defense to quickly stab his unprotected throat. Chapter 16. Hanank's squad wasn't made up of ordinary herdsmen. They were all elite warriors who had gone through the tribe's hunting ritual. On the other hand, Epicurus merchant guards and mercenaries mostly relied on their individual bravery and martial prowess to fight. Clearly, they were much weaker in terms of teamwork. The patient elven warriors would often send their obsidian scimitars into the elves' bodies when they were slacking off. Send a message to the 3 monsters. Tell them to stop those damned elven riders from damaging my property. After that, I will provide each of them with a chainmail vest as a reward. Epicurus' eyes widened as he roared at his trusted caravan warriors. The price of 3 chainmail vests was not small, and it made him feel a little pained. However, he had no choice but to pay the price. The battle was already very dangerous. What was even more frightening was that 1/5 of the slave goods that were supposed to be sent to the dragon's lair as a tribute in exchange for rewards had been lost. 1/5, no, almost a quarter of the loss. Plus 3 chainmail vests. Premium. This time, it must be a premium. Of the 3 ogre brothers who received the message, the happiest was Neru, who always had the strength to become a blacksmith as his dream. Of course, he knew what chainmail was. It was an expensive armor made of fine metal rings. The rewards from the arena didn't have such high-quality goods. He didn't know how to make it himself. He couldn't learn how to make such a fine item just by listening to others. Perhaps Blue could learn it, and so could Paulu. However, they didn't like to forge. Stingy little guy. He finally learned to be generous for once. Even Nera knows that spending money is better than bleeding. The three ogre brothers were in the middle of the caravan's formation, and it would take a while for the flames of war to reach them. The big Nera waved his newly made ebony flail excitedly and charged at the knights and slave soldiers who were stuck in a stalemate, completely ignoring the fact that his allies' formation was being torn apart by his charge. "Grr, the chainmail is yours. Slow down." Blue and Paulu saw that Nero had already charged and could only follow closely behind. They had to trot all the way to catch up to the large ogre's charging pace. The elven rider, who was wantonly killing using his scimitar and shield to cut and hit the newly armed slaves, had just heard a loud roar that sounded like an ogre burping from a distance behind him. An enormous force that could not be resisted was directly transmitted to him and his desert horse through a chain that descended from the sky. The tall steed was sent flying along with its rider. It rolled and crashed into the ground, stopping the rider. In his last consciousness, the rider saw an ogre fall from a high place and smash into the ground, the sand of the ogre's weight. The ogre, of course. The ogre sank into the sand as deep as an elf's calf, but that was only the ogre's ankle. The ogre's weight. The ogre of the ogre's calf. The depth of the ogre's ankle of the ankle. There really are ogres. That was the last thing the rider said. His own front line and the elven cavalry were in a stalemate, hindering Neru. When he was anxious, he would directly throw his weapon out and then use his thick thighs and calves to leap over the crowd of men and horses, crossing most of the battlefield in midair. Even though some of the elven warriors tried to swing their swords into the air, their obsidian blades could not cut through the ogre's tough, tumor-like skin. Moreover, the ogre was wearing armor that he had crafted himself. He gently relaxed his feet that were numb from landing and picked up the ebony flail stuck in the body of a desert steed. The smell of fresh blood stimulated the ogre's hunting instincts. Nero tore off a piece of rib from the dead steed and put it in his mouth. He chewed and swallowed while he quickly found the place where the enemy's little people were densely packed. He waved the ebony flail and found the right direction. He aimed the ram at the enemy. When he ran, the tall, thin little people were sent flying. When he continued running, the elves continued to be sent flying. Even the elven riders who stood upright on their horses with their stirrups were only as tall as the waist of this ogre, a monster that was considered large even among the ogres. If the difference in height was 2 times, then the difference in weight was 4 times. No, it was definitely more than that. The blood and guts of the horses and riders that were sent flying were proof. Wielding the flail wasn't smooth at first, but Na Lu slowly got the hang of it. He kept the chain spinning, lashing at enemies far away with the chain, and greeting enemies close by with the ebony stinger with the heavy body of the staff. The strong ogre was invincible for the time being. "Barbarossa, you take care of this ogre. Warriors of the tribe, use the horse's rope to restrain this monster." The chief's son had rich combat experience. He had encountered similar situations in the past where large monsters fought. Thus, he directly called out the name of the tribe's chanter and had him use sound speech to deal with this opponent that could not be defeated by brute force. He also had the tribe's warriors harass the ogre from the side. As for himself, he had to seize the opportunity while the tribe's chanter delayed the ogre and make the final decision. No matter how strong the opponent's arms and torso are, the throat and heart are always their weak points. Using the elven language to recite the hunting skills his father had taught him since he was young, Harkonnen stopped himself from looking at the evil monster that was wreaking havoc among the tribe's ordinary warriors. The chief's son's light blue eyes shone brightly in the morning sun. His gaze was locked onto a group of merchant guards that had not shown any signs of moving on the sand dune behind the slave camp. Throat and heart, they've been discovered. Humph, cowardly humans. Harkonnen raised his right hand and drew a circle with his scythe sword in the air. This was to gather the Andarian warriors who were watching over his safety. When he felt that it was about time, the tip of his sword suddenly slashed down, slicing through the air and the throat of an ambusher. He pointed at the small group of warriors gathered on the rocks behind the sand dune. I, Harkonnen Alto, son of Hadjar Alto, lead the Andarian warriors. Prepare to advance without retreat. Charge to the death. This was the tradition of the Salem Rangers. Under the leadership of the noblest person, they would not retreat or hide from the enemy. It was a ritual to attack until the end of the battle. Encouraged by Harkonnen, his Andarian warriors could not help but shout for Harkonnen Alto as they tightened the stirrups to make the horses run faster so that they could keep up with the nobles' charging footsteps. The fine horses in the desert were strong and slender. They had great explosive power. Their wide hooves could run on the sand without sinking. When they ran on the sand dune, they only left sand and dust behind them. The six-legged horse that Harkonnen rode had the bloodline of the ancient elves' battle companion, the six-legged horned beast. After the first charge, and fighting for such a long time, it was still full of energy. It ran at the front of the troop, leaving the dust in its wake. 6 legs were faster than 4 legs, and 4 legs were faster than 2 legs. The guards and hired warriors of the caravan were caught up in the battle with the elven warriors. They could not do anything else. The other slaves and warriors did not have mounts, so they could not stop the elven cavalry that was charging to the death. The ogre Neru, who was spreading fear among the elves and the slave army, had encountered some trouble. The thin and tall elven little people who were originally weak to him suddenly became cunning. They kept throwing nets used for hunting and lassos used to restrain horses at him. Although they did not succeed in trapping him, someone had already put on his ebony flail. Neru had spent some effort, but fortunately his weapon was not stolen. He wanted to charge out again. As long as he got close to the elves, the little people who threw lassos would scatter. As long as he stood still, they would come out of nowhere and continue to harass him. Neru's battle instincts told him that there was a dangerous person hiding among the little people. If he was not careful, he would be seriously injured. This was the wild instinct of an ogre. Countless battles in the wasteland and the arena had proven the validity of this instinct. We need to meet up with Palu and Buru. The blacksmith ogre, Nalu, had excellent eyesight. Ogres were tall and large, so the elven warriors and slave fighters fighting together could not block the shadows of his 2 brothers. But when he saw his 2 brothers and was about to step forward to meet up with them, a voice suddenly sounded beside him. Ja. At first, the sound wasn't loud, but after a while, the sound was amplified several times in his ears. Na Lu, who hadn't felt any fatigue since the beginning of the battle, suddenly staggered and felt dizzy. He even showed signs of being unable to stand properly. Humph, Osaviotissa. The ogre witch doctor's troll staff blocked Barbarossa's gorm spikes that were aimed at Neru. The trembling troll head then spewed out a thick green gas that smelled like rotten plants and animals that would only appear in old swamps. The gas seemed to be controlled by the ogre witch doctor's voodoo incantation. It was difficult for the wind to blow it away, and the green gas automatically gathered around the elven chanter who attacked Neru. Not good. It might be poisonous. I can't use sound magic. Shrouded in the foul gas Barbarossa was worried that the poison would harm his throat. He did not dare to speak rashly, and used sound magic to dispel the gas around him. Left with no choice, he could only hold his breath and hide behind the warriors around him, hoping that he could find a safer place to deal with his problem. "Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze." Barbarossa, who was charging towards a warrior, was suddenly punched in the chin by a fist that suddenly appeared from his invisibility spell. His teeth shattered, and his body flew high into the air. At the same time, he heard the last sound of his life. Achoo! With that sneeze, an explosive fireball that was half the size of Barbarossa hit him. The green gas that emitted a foul smell was an explosive gas that greatly increased the power of the flames. The two ogres who were still far away suddenly burst like bubbles and disappeared without a trace. Mimicry, invisibility, and explosive flames. Not only was Buru the ogre, who wanted to be a gourmet, but he was also a gifted ogre warlock, who said that a gourmet who wanted to be a chef was not a good warlock. Chapter 17. What a brilliant battle tactic. Keyes, who had been standing on the sandstone behind Epicurus for a long time, naturally saw how the three ogre brothers worked together to kill the elven chanter. In particular, the ogre warlock that appeared at the end used a unique spell ability, which surprised Keyes even more. He didn't use life force of equivalent value to cast the spell, which was different from the Adas abilities that the mainstream mages of this world used. It also wasn't like the spell casting that was popular in other worlds by communicating with the mysterious source. This seems to be a rather primitive spell, similar to the spells that the earliest bloodline warlocks developed. It has traces of primitive shaman magic, using some materials to cast the spell. It can't be spell casting without materials, but it definitely has the wisdom to summarize and use the knowledge of spells. If it's an ability that he discovered on his own, this ogre's intelligence is probably not low. It might even be more outstanding than most human spellcasters. Thinking of this, he turned his gaze closer. The trusted guards of the slave merchants were fighting against the warriors of Anda, the sons of the chieftain, who were ready to charge to the death. This was a new stalemate on the battlefield. Huck Keenan's six-legged warhorse took the lead, charging up to the shady side of the sand dune within 30 breaths. Behind him were 12 elven riders who were similarly well-equipped and full of fighting spirit. Before they even charged into the defensive formation, the tribal chief's son threw the javelin in his hand. With the help of the horse's high speed, the javelin was so fast that it tore through the air. The merchant guards who were attacked didn't even have time to raise their shields to defend themselves. The javelin pierced through the leather armor, and the huge penetrating force directly knocked the injured off their horses. They were impaled on the javelin and let out painful howls. 1, 2, 3, 4. The same scene happened 4 times in a few breaths. He only kept one javelin as a secondary weapon in his left hand, accompanied by the elven rider's shouts, "For Huck Keenan!" The chieftain's son and his Anda warriors charged into the defensive formation of the caravan warriors. "Stop them!" Epicurus used all his strength to order his trusted guards to protect him. The merchant pulled out a sharp scimitar that he had bought not long ago. There were cloud patterns on the blade that could only be formed after repeated hammering by a blacksmith master. Nugo's white robe was already covered with 2 layers of exquisite chain mail made by a master of armor. The saber was a good saber, and the armor was tough. However, the man in armor and wielding the sword was not prepared. How many years had it been since he last touched a scimitar? How long had he been wasting his time making friends with the rich and powerful instead of immersing himself in the path of a warrior? Epicurus knew that regret could not change the current situation. He tried his best not to think about how the reflection of the scimitar would affect his strength. The situation was urgent, and the warrior commander beside him had also joined the battle. He knew that it was time for him to fight with his life on the line, just like the first time he encountered the bandits. For Huck Keenan's glory, cut down these cowardly kneeling people. Hold on, kill these elven bastards. The elven language and the common language were mixed with curses and encouragement. Relying on the fact that the blade in his hand was much sharper than the obsidian blades of the elven warriors, Epicurus also killed an elven thief who wanted to steal his life. Panting heavily, the stench of sweat and the trembling of his arm after the clash reminded him of some battle techniques. Epicurus calmed down a little. We have more people. As long as we hold on and don't get separated, we will definitely win in the end. The merchant thought, but as soon as this thought appeared, reality gave him a slap in the face. Seeing that Epicurus had killed his Anda, the tribal chief's son exploded in anger. While the six-legged warhorse was biting the opponent's hunchback, the scimitar in his hand flashed past the opponent's blocking scimitar and took the head of the warrior commander of the caravan. Hagen! Epicurus's eyes almost popped out of their sockets when he saw his friend who had followed him for many years and grew up with him killed. He knew that the warrior commander was the strongest among his retinue, but he did not expect him to be killed so quickly. Cowardly kneeling people, tremble. Hajar Khan's fourth son, Huck Keenan, will take your life. I mean what I say. The tribal chief's son was a man of his words. As soon as he finished speaking, he threw the last javelin in his left hand directly at Epicurus. Just when everyone thought that the merchant would be pierced by the javelin, the air suddenly rippled like water, and an arm grabbed the metal spear head in front of Epicurus. Maybe you need some help? Keys, who had transformed into a human teenager, removed the high-level invisibility spell and grabbed the javelin that was about to take the merchant's life. He then smiled at the merchant. Huck Keenan, who had launched the attack, fixed his eyes on Keys, who had suddenly appeared in the air. Although the young man looked to be only 13 or 14 years old, and he was wearing a leather armor that did not fit him, well, Huck Keenan's eyes were fixed on Keys. But just by being able to catch the weapon that he had thrown with all his strength and with such ease, it was enough to raise his vigilance to the highest level. Not to mention that before the young man appeared, he had obviously used some incomprehensible magic to hide his body. Was he a spellcaster? Or did he have a companion hiding nearby? Or did he use some kind of magic item? The tribal chief's son's pupils contracted as he tried to observe carefully, but he did not know how to cast spells and did not have the ability of arcane vision. He could not see the fact that the young man's body was a ferocious beast. May I ask who you are? When Epicurus saw the young man who had suddenly appeared in front of his horse, he was also shocked, but he was still sharp enough to notice some problems. He did not notice it from Keys, but because the war horse he was sitting on suddenly became restless. The war horses of the caravan were strictly trained since they were young. No matter how cruel the battle was, they would not have the slightest hint of fear. But now they were extremely frightened. If he had not held the reins tightly to control them, the war horse might have even turned around and run away. Epicurus had a guess. This was the edge of the dragon's territory. When the caravan had done the tribute trade before, they had also encountered such a situation. The war horses, whose senses were sharper than humans, were afraid of the powerful creatures that truly stood at the top of the food chain. The blue dragon tribe ruled by the dragon's nest. Thinking of this, the identity of the young man in front of him was obvious. Yes, that's it. I just need to show my badge. The merchant hurriedly dismounted and took out the box that contained the legendary Megalosaurus Sorota's token from the side pocket of the saddle. You're a smart man. According to the rules, the dragon's nest has the obligation to provide protection to you and your caravan within the territory. Keys ignored the merchant who presented the token to him as if he was trying to please him. In fact, When the battle had just begun, he had already come out from the 13th manufacturing workshop of Gothman. That was buried. He had already sensed the aura of Sorota's token on Epicurus. But don't you need more protection? Chapter 18. Of course, Lord of the Dragon's lair. I, Epicurus, am fulfilling my obligation to pay tribute to the great legendary Lord of Thunder, Lord Sorota and his tribe. Although my respect has not decreased, but because of these damned bandits, the gifts I use to express my respect have been greatly damaged. Now, my caravan needs more protection. Guessing the identity of the young man in front of him, the merchant carefully organized his words. Keyes weighed the javelin in his hand. It was obvious that the weapon of the chieftain's son was much better than his men. Even the javelin used as a consumable weapon had a fully metal spearhead. It was estimated that the merchant's mail armor would not be able to defend against such a penetrating weapon. You are a smart man, merchant. Carefully check the legal documents you signed or the agreement with the dragon's lair. According to the old dragon's habits, there must be such a contract. It says that your caravan will be protected, but there is absolutely no guarantee that you will live. Think about how many gold coins it will cost you to block such a sharp javelin. We still have some time. The blue dragon, pretending to be a greedy threat, casually threw the javelin on the sand. The huge force completely penetrated the javelin into the ground, leaving only a small hole on the surface. Keyes and Epicurus did not speak in the human language of this world. Instead, they spoke in a dragon-like language that was commonly used by some of the dragon tribes that guarded the dragon's lair. The elven chieftain's son, Hucknan, did not understand, but seeing the two of them talking less than 10 steps away from him, as if there was no one else around, it was obvious that they ignored him. The strong sense of shame brought by his strong self-esteem suppressed his panic in the face of the strange human youth that suddenly appeared. Hucknan clenched the curved sword in his hand, squeezed the six-legged warhorse under him, and continued to rush toward the leader of the caravan and the mysterious young man who was talking to him. Charge to the death. Never retreat. If you die, we will live. This was the last war wisdom that his father taught him. Hucknan deeply believed in it. 10 steps, 5 steps, the close-range sprint, the six-legged warhorse's speed was unique. Just when Huck Keenan thought that his beloved sickle sword would soon taste the flesh and blood of the boy, he saw the boy calmly take out something and then pointed it at him. It seemed to be some kind of weapon. Perhaps it was a crossbow, but there was no bow arm. Only 2 black cylinders with some decorative patterns engraved on them could be seen. Bang! Before the sound could be heard, there was an explosion of fire, first spurting out from one of the strange weapon cylinders. Huck Keenan's six-legged warhorse felt as if it had been hit by a battering ram. The huge force directly tore apart the leather armor in front of the horse's chest and the muscles under the armor. Although he couldn't see it with his own eyes, Huck Keenan could imagine his mount's internal organs rupturing. Warm blood gushed out from his mount's eyes, nostrils, ears, and even anus like a fountain. The huge stopping effect forcibly stopped the warhorse in its tracks. Under the sudden inertia, Huck Keenan couldn't even control his landing. He directly rolled forward, landing at the foot of Keyes. Before the chief's son could bounce up and continue fighting, he was kicked in the head, and the elf prince fainted. Keyes stepped on the captive with one foot and tilted his head to look at Epicurus playfully. It was as if he was saying, "This is my sincerity. Your portion will depend on your performance." In fact, the blue dragon wiped away a non-existent cold sweat in his heart. As expected, I'm a master of body tracing. I was aiming at a person, but I ended up hitting the horse. Looking at the tenacious six-legged warhorse that was still struggling in a pool of blood, Keyes quietly and carefully aimed at the horse's head. He used another bullet from the wailing double-barreled shotgun to end the beast's pain. Phew, that was close. Fortunately, I didn't miss the fixed target. This marksmanship might still be salvageable. Holding the antique weapon that he found in Wortman's control room with one hand, Keyes was secretly pleased with himself. Hey, how's your thinking? Sir, I'm willing to provide some goods worth 2,000 silver kai as compensation. I hope that you can help me suppress these damned elven bandits. I want to treat them all as the most lowly slaves and offer them to the great Lord of Thunder. Epicurus seemed to be attracted by the weapon that Keyes used. He seemed to want to say something else. Keyes held the wailing in his right hand and tapped the gun body on his left hand. He said with a double meaning, "Merchant, I'm really surprised by your greed. No, please believe in my sincerity. For 1,000 silver kai, these elves are decent warriors. As slaves, you'll make a profit." Keyes used the gun barrel to stop the merchant's impulse to explain. Also, each of them has a war horse. How many of them survive in the end will be calculated at 50 silver kai per horse. Remember, I'll accept silver coins or other items of equal value. Without waiting for the merchant to bargain, Keyes dispelled the spell amidst the gasps and cries of the war horses. A robust blue dragon appeared on the sand dune. Epicurus came to the dragon's lair to trade every year. Naturally, he had seen a blue dragon before. However, he dared to say that this blue dragon with indigo scales was not the largest he had ever seen, but it definitely looked the strongest. When this terrifying creature tilted its huge head slightly, squinted its dark golden eyes, and glanced at him, and asked, "What do you think?" The merchant completely lost the courage to bargain for his own interests. Looking at the merchant's cowering and agreeing to all his previous requests, the blue dragon Keyes could not help but think, sure enough, no matter where you go, it's a society where looks matter. When facing a blue dragon with it charging to death proved to be a suicidal move. With the son of the chieftain as a hostage, his Andaman warriors naturally gave up resistance. On the battlefield under the sand dune, there were no chanters who could control the sound. Under the attack of the three ogre brothers, the elves were utterly defeated and were on the verge of collapse. It was no wonder that the blue dragon Keyes sighed. Not long after the ferocious dragon's body appeared on the top of the sand dune, the battle was ended. The elves of the Ash world might really be stronger than their counterparts in other worlds. Huck, who had been knocked unconscious, woke up not long after the battle ended. However, at this time, his hands and feet were firmly tied by ropes made of hibiscus. It took some effort to stand up. "You'd better be obedient. I heard from others that you are the fourth son of a chieftain. I have ordered a few captives to be released to inform your father. If he can take out property that matches your identity, you can still look forward to your freedom." The blue dragon at this time changed back into the appearance of a human teenager. He was sitting on the cushion that originally belonged to Epicurus, trying to maintain the antique gun wailing, while waiting for the merchant to check the number of newly obtained slaves and horses so that he could pay the commission. Chapter 19. Epicurus had to pay a little more than 4,000 silver coins for the war horses and new slaves. He couldn't afford the rest, so Keyes generously let him use some spices to make up for it. Keyes didn't fly back to the dragon's lair immediately. He was interested in the ogre warlock who had discovered a unique spellcasting technique. There was no memory of such a spellcasting technique in the dragon's heritage. In the blue dragon's lair, it cost a lot for the younger dragons to learn spellcasting from the older dragons or even the lair lord, Sorota. After all, the blue dragon wasn't a selfless creature. Therefore, it was a rare opportunity for Keyes to learn some new knowledge at a low cost. "Generous big fella, you're here to try Brew's delicacies again today, right?" The ogre gourmet, who was focused on dealing with the camel beast ribs on the barbecue grill in front of him, greeted Quess happily when he saw him walking over with food. Keyes gave the spices he got from Epicurus to the three brothers for free. He gained a good reputation among the ogres for being generous and hospitable. Keyes, who had transmigrated from the empire of gluttony, naturally didn't refuse to share his food. Of course, I'm looking forward to your new roasted camel meat brew. The chili sauce from yesterday was really strong. I want to try it again. Keyes passed the jujube wine that Epicurus gave to the ogre gourmet. Brew opened the barrel and tasted it. His eyes lit up, and he passed the barrel to his two brothers. Hey, friend, this water is good. It has a precious sweetness. Brew licked his lips and looked expectantly at Neru, who was drinking heartily. He hoped that his brother would leave him a small mouthful so that he could savor the taste. This isn't water, Brew. This is wine made from jujubes. It doesn't have much alcohol content. Of course, this sweet wine is very expensive. The witch doctor Ogre Paru, who was well-versed in plants, explained to his brother after taking a small bite. The little ones are all cowardly and stingy. Only the big ones like us. And the big ones are generous and brave. As expected, Na Lu drank all the jujube in the wine barrel in one gulp. He raised the wine barrel with one hand as if he was holding a wine cup and greeted Keyes, who said that ogres were straightforward bores. This big guy was obviously flattering him. Keyes looked at Rue's sincere expression and thought that if he hadn't cooperated with his two brothers to kill the troublesome elven chanter, the blue dragon might have been fooled by him. I know, Nalu. There's only one barrel left in this caravan. When we get back to the dragon's nest, I'll give you a few more barrels to satisfy your cravings. Keyes transformed into his human form and stood between the three ogre brothers. He patted blacksmith Nalu's shoulder and said, the boorish ogre, who had obtained the desired result, could not help but pout at his brother, indicating that his little scheme had succeeded. Mighty messenger of the dragon's nest, please forgive my brother's rudeness. Paru, who was the most mature among the three ogre brothers, nodded slightly to express his apology to Keyes. It's all right, witch doctor. Do you have any more vitality ointment? I want to experience the cooling sensation again. Other than the Ogre Gourmet's unique spellcasting ability, the Ogre Voodoo ointment provided by the Ogre Voodoo doctor also gave Quess a huge surprise. Apart from the disgusting color and appearance of the ointment, Quess felt that it was very familiar to him, whether it was from the smell or the cool and refreshing feeling after applying it. So this is the cooling ointment. Craith applied the ointment that the witch doctor passed to him. He recalled the ointment that he would often use when he was bitten by mosquitoes in the summer back in his hometown. Craith couldn't help but recall some vague memories. This ointment is amazing. The ogre witch doctor loved it when others praised the effects of his potions. It was the greatest compliment to his abilities. Apart from his brothers who could tolerate the appearance and smell of his potions, the other little people couldn't spontaneously like the potions he invented. Well, Big Guy Keyes was an exception. Actually, Paru has another type of vitality ointment. Its effects are much better, and it even has some detoxification effects, the Ogre Gourmet said with his head lowered as he fiddled with the ribs. That's right, that's right. Na Lu chimed in excitedly. That's right. However, this potion needs to be consumed quickly. It can't be tasted carefully because, seeing Keyes looking at him, the ogre witch doctor took out a small water skin. The water skin was made from the fascia of an unknown animal. Holding it in his hand, a yellowish-brown liquid could be seen wriggling inside. With his talent, Keyes didn't think it would be a problem. Without waiting for Paru to finish speaking, he opened the waterskin stopper and took a sip. PFFF, bitter, bitter. Damn it, this is 10 times the strong flavor of Hwaseong Vital Energy. Attack the ugly Hwaseong Vital Energy. This was a powerful potion that could cause a shift in alignment. Seeing Keys's pained expression, Bru, who was suppressing his pain with his head lowered, and Na Lu, who was looking forward to it, burst into laughter. Paru looked embarrassed. He wanted to say something, but stopped himself. You can only drink a little at a time because the taste is too bitter. It's fine. Drink some of this to relieve your internal heat. It's said that Xiang vital energy goes well with roasted meat in this hot weather. Keys said sinisterly. Keys didn't care if the ogres could understand him. He wrapped one arm around Bru's neck and used the other hand to pour the potion into Bru's open mouth. Oh, let me go. Didn't you want to know about my spellcasting knowledge? It's all in the gourmet book. I'll lend you the book. The intelligent ogre, who always had his own ideas, used his wisdom to save himself. Bru was only forced to take a small sip before he was released. It was as if he had been reborn. However, the blacksmith, Ogre Neru, wasn't so lucky. Although it had monstrous strength, it was still stronger as a gifted young dragon. Big guy. I can give you a few pieces of armor made by Neru, or I can teach you how to forge. I was destined to carry bricks in my previous life. I won't learn how to forge in this life. Thud, thud, thud. The rest of the potion was poured into the ogre Neru's mouth. Balu, this potion won't kill Neru, right? Bru whispered to Balu when he saw that his brother was on the brink of death after being poisoned. After receiving a negative answer, Bru and Keys laughed heartily at Neru's misfortune. Ha 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 ha. After following the caravan for a few days, Keys studied Bru's Guide to Cooking Ogre Delicacies and slowly summarized the knowledge of ogre warlocks about their spellcasting. It's a rather novel spellcasting method, but it also has traces of the spellcasting habits of bloodline warlocks. Unlike directly communicating with a mysterious source or using life force as an equivalent exchange to cast spells, the ogre's technique is to explore the properties of some materials to simulate the sensory state of the spellcasting process. He doesn't study the essence of things to determine the principles and then construct spell models like the wizards. Instead, he uses materials to stimulate himself and bring about synesthesia. He uses the superficial senses to directly see or experience the spell model. Then, he uses his mind to adjust the elements to stabilize the model and achieve the effect of spellcasting. For example, when an ogre uses Flame Blast, he first uses the taste of spicy to stimulate his synesthesia. Living creatures can't taste spicy. This taste is actually a compound feeling of burning and slight pain. It is through this experience that the ogre warlocks extract the unique sense of burning. This feeling is actually similar to the shaman witchcraft that uses fire as a sacrificial offering or self-sacrifice to obtain the perception of fire itself. Through the sensory stimulation of the spicy taste, the ogre warlocks can simulate the nature of the flames. Add to that the explosion caused by the sneezing of the air and the combination of the two together. Finally, some warlocks have the innate ability to manipulate the elements and fill them in the sensory spell model, and the Flame Blast spell is formed. It's very similar to the shaman's ability to construct spells, but it has the skills of a warlock. Therefore, it's not wrong to call the ogre warlocks. This is a novel spellcasting method formed by experience and intuition. The ogre warlocks already have a few very good spells in the field of evoking. The use of simulacrum on the battlefield shows that this technique can still work in the field of illusion. But I wonder if the abilities of other spellcasting schools can be effectively simulated. If it can be simulated, what materials do I need to stimulate my senses? There's no need to memorize spells in advance, no need for spell structures, no need for incantations. If it weren't for the fact that there's no way to avoid the drawback of not being able to cast spells without materials, and there are too many spells that exist, there's the question of whether it can be simulated. This can indeed be called a new path of spellcasting. If the ancient civilization also had this spellcasting method, would it be possible to win against the annihilation civilization that has the power of spell prohibition? Keyes thought about this question for a moment. In the end, he rationally told himself that it was impossible. The Reaper civilization was able to force a powerful civilization that could compete with the Netheril civilization that was prosperous with arcane magic to use the Curse of Fate. The Annihilation Messenger's restrictions on spellcasting ability must be far beyond his imagination. In the end, this spellcasting ability still required the mobilization of elements. Perhaps in their spell prohibition domain, whether there were any spellcasting elements was a problem. Of course, this didn't prevent him from learning a novel and interesting ability. As for the use of this ability, Keyes also had some ideas. He couldn't wait to imagine the stimulation that he could bring to other dragons when he used simulacrum to simulate the breath of other chromatic dragons and even metallic dragons. Of course, he probably couldn't simulate some special dragon breaths. P.S. Spellcasting School, also known as Spellcasting School, Magic School, etc. It's the rule that spells are artificially divided into 8 major spellcasting schools and 1 universal school according to their effects. The 8 major spellcasting schools are Defense, Incantation, Prophecy, Enchantment, Evoking, and Illusion. A few spells, such as Arcane Mark, Limited Wish, Permanency, Prestidigitation, and Wish, don't belong to any school and are called universal spells. Chapter 20. In addition to the novel knowledge obtained from the ogres, some strange potions, and the additional protection fee from the merchant Epicurus, Keyes, who was following the caravan, had a new harvest just before they reached the core area controlled by the dragon's kin. Several elven captives who were released after the previous battle quickly brought back a reply from the chief of the Salem tribe regarding the ransom of his son. It was a group of 10 powerful elven warriors, led by an elven chanter, who escorted the elven captives to ransom their chief's beloved son. The elven chanter leading the team was called Brock, but those who knew him well in the tribe would call him by his nickname, the Tongue Taker. His figure was robust, and his muscles were bulging. When he walked, he was like an eagle looking at a wolf, and he was truly ferocious. There were elves who said that the blood of the green-skinned orcs flowed in his veins, but he challenged and defeated them one by one. According to the tribe's rules, the defeated elves had to take away something that belonged to them as the spoils of war for the victor. Brock's choice was always the same, the tongue of the rumor-monger. The cold Brock, the cruel tongue-taker. Not only was he the tribe's most elite 10-pillar warriors, but he also needed to stick 10 spears with the heads of the enemy tribe's warriors at the entrance of the tent where he lived as a human headpole to show his bravery. Brock was also a chanter who could control the unique sound spell of the desert elves. This required rare talent and decades of diligent practice. In addition, he also had to endure the strict requirement of not eating any spicy food for the rest of his life. Only such a strong person would be able to subdue an elite team composed entirely of the 10-pillar warriors. As Hajar Alto's friend since young, and as Hajar Khan's most trusted warrior commander, he clearly knew the dangerous situation that the tribe was facing now, although the tribe's morale was high, and the warriors were busy sharpening their swords and spears. But the tug-of-war with the equally powerful Samhain tribe had already made the quartermasters in charge of logistics despair. The tribe's army could drain an oasis's water source in a week, and the newly born livestock would be used as rations by the army before they could be raised. The quartermasters were even studying whether they could use the captured enemies to solve the food problem. In addition, the human empire's eyes were always on the periphery of the tribe. They seemed to be plotting to eliminate the threat of the elf tribe once and for all. Within the elf tribe, the decadent elders took it as a form of glory to keep the chieftain in check. They greedily enjoyed the power given to them by the traditions of the elf tribe. Like a group of parasites, they slowly extinguished the vitality of the elf tribe. But the war could not stop. Only by defeating the Samhain tribe would the chief be qualified to be called the chief of the elven tribe. Only when Hadjar became the Khan of all the elven tribes could he unite the strength of all the desert warriors. Only with this force could they conquer the cities of the human empires. Only then could the desert elves enjoy more water sources and raise more livestock. Only by breaking the seal of the city could they break the iron chain tied around the desert tribes' throats by the cowardly and powerful people who knelt. Quess, who had transformed into a human teenager, looked at the Salem tribe messenger in front of him who looked more like an orc than an elf. His keen spiritual sense allowed him to discover that this warrior dressed like a warrior seemed to have a strong magic aura. So, you're a spellcaster. You must be the unorthodox mage who used sound waves to fight like the three brothers defeated. Revered messenger of the dragon's nest, I am the special envoy of the Salem tribe, Hadjar Khan. I am fully responsible for communicating and discussing the exchange of tribal warriors. Elven chanter Brock's neck was encircled by a leather tube. This was an enchanted equipment he invented to enhance the effect of sound waves. But this way, Brock's words would always be accompanied by the gurgling sound of boiling water. Originally, the chief sent the best of the best warriors as a negotiator with the idea that if the negotiation did not go well, he could use force to subdue the other party. Based on the description of the blue dragon's size from the captive, the knowledgeable chief understood that the one who had captured his son was most likely a young dragon, or at most a young dragon. Tongue Taker. Brock had the experience of killing a two-headed monitor lizard and a sand elemental giant. Those monsters were close to the strength of an adult megalosaurus. As for whether or not the young dragon should ask for help from his own kind, the blue dragon's arrogant personality and the price of helping his own kind was too much for a young dragon to bear. Of course, he could not kill the young dragon. The revenge of an adult blue dragon from the dragon's nest was not something he could bear. Although he traveled day and night and caught up with the Epicurus caravan before entering the core area of the dragon's nest, he saw the young blue dragon who had captured Huck Nan. But in the current situation, not to mention that the young dragon seemed to have strength that far exceeded his age, this was Brock's intuition to accurately assess the strength of his opponent. There were also 3 strong ogres standing behind the blue dragon, who had turned into a human teenager. The most robust one probably had the potential to grow into an ogre warlord. The other 2 were emitting faint magic waves. These were 2 ogre spellcasters. Being able to correctly assess the situation was also a good habit of Brock. Giving up the plan to show his strength, Tongue Taker proposed a plan to deal with this situation. As the 4th son of Hadjar Khan, Huck Nan has the legal right to be redeemed first. The released captives brought back news that Huck Nan is still alive, so I want to exercise the right to redeem him first. Brock pulled out an elf who was obviously whipped recently from behind him and bowed slightly to Keys. Thank you for the kindness of the powerful messenger of the dragon's nest. This is one of the captives you sent back. It was he who brought your request to the leader of Salem, Hadjar Alto. Keys could guarantee that the captives he chose to send back were those who had not suffered any injuries in the battle, and they had definitely not been whipped by Epicurus or anyone else. And the captive in front of him, who was pulled out by the messenger named Brock, had obviously encountered a disaster after returning to the tribe. The environment can really affect people. I used to think that elves were elegant and peaceful creatures. I didn't expect that in the cruel natural environment of the Ash world, the desert elves here have become so violent. Keys could not help but secretly click his tongue. Elves of Salem, I agree that you have the right to redeem the son of your tribe's chief, but I remember that the condition I asked this person to bring back is wealth that matches the identity of the chief's son. Keyes looked at a few caravan warriors who brought the elf chief's son, who was tied up with a hemp rope, and motioned for them to step back and not untie the rope, including the bit that was worn to prevent the elves from yelling. Brock used his cold eyes to stop the supreme warriors behind him, who were so angry that they wanted to draw their swords when they saw Hucknan tied up. Then he turned his head and tried to make his eyes look straight at the human boy, who was the incarnation of a terrible monster. The chief taught the people of Salem that the principle of trade is fairness and justice. Since I was ordered to negotiate the redemption, I was prepared to pay an equivalent exchange. The principle of trade is fairness and justice. I'm afraid that the source of profit is from the strong bullying the weak. Paying with swords is more cost-effective than paying with money. Keyes maliciously guessed at the fierce-looking messenger. Brock took out a leather scroll from his arms and showed it to the blue dragon boy. Seeing that the boy had no objection, he opened the scroll and squatted down to spread it on the carpet. This is a map, but it needs a special method to show the terrain. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the elf messenger suddenly stood up and grabbed the hair of the prisoner who was standing beside him, who had been whipped until he was covered in wounds. With a sudden force, the injured warrior was thrown to the ground by Brock. A flash of a sword cut open his armor, and like a dagger made of crystal, it accurately pierced the warrior's heart. In the hands of the cruel and powerful elf messenger, the unlucky warrior didn't even have time to beg for mercy before his life was taken away. Keyes stopped Epicurus, who was frightened by the sudden killing, and wanted to shout for the guards. I'm sorry to dirty your carpet, but this is a necessary method to make the map show. Using the soul dagger to harvest a fresh life is similar to condensing obsidian magic beads to cast spells. Only then can the magic circle on the map be activated. Following these clues on the map, you can find unimaginable treasures. Brock pulled out the dagger and glanced at the leader of the caravan as if he was talking about something trivial. Keyes didn't care about the performance of the elf. His attention was attracted by the changes on the map. The dagger made of soul crystal turned bright red, which meant that there was already soul energy stored inside. The dagger stabbed into the map as if it was stabbed into a pool of water. The blood-red soul energy colored the whole scroll, and lines like blood vessels appeared. This magic scroll doesn't seem to be the work of the elves. Keyes raised his head and asked, Indeed, this map is the equivalent of the chief's exchange, and its origin is unknown. Maybe it's a legendary treasure of the tribe, or maybe it's a treasure that was handed over after being plundered by the tribe. But I can be sure that the person who made this map is not an elf. Brock carefully answered. He could intimidate ignorant and cowardly merchants, but he had to be careful when dealing with this young man who was the incarnation of a powerful blue dragon. This map shows a secret realm to the west of the dragon's lair. After obtaining this map and finding a way to make it appear, Hajar Khan once led the elites, including myself, to explore this place indicated on the map. In the end, only Hajar and I escaped. Brock deliberately hid the results of that exploration. Then what did you find? What valuable things were there that could replace the ransom of the chief's son? As a matter of fact, we've had some problems in it, said Blatch, choosing not to use the adjective fatal for the problems. That place seemed to be the laboratory of an ancient soul-binding sorcerer who had passed away. It was a huge building hidden under the sea of sand. When we were exploring, we identified some of the words carved on the stone slabs that were similar to the ancient Elven language. Therefore, we determined that it was the lair of an ancient spellcaster. As for the conclusion that the spellcaster was an evil sorcerer, it came from the attacks of the Chimera guards we encountered. That's the domain of evil sorcerers. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.